Sadiq Al-Hassan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for the response. During my recent visit to Nailsea and Backwell Disability Access Cafe, I had the privilege of meeting remarkable residents like Alison. A recurring theme emerged among access to government services, which often assumes internet access and capability. What additional measures is the Department implementing to ensure everyone in North Somerset, particularly those with disabilities or limited digital skills, can access vital government forms and assistance in formats that truly work for them?
Minister.
There are so many parts of the way we want to deliver our public services where we can improve productivity if we manage to do so on a digital basis. I'm conscious that in Doncaster Hospital, for instance, they still employ 42 people just to carry around physical medical records. That is clearly a nonsense and we need to change it. But he's absolutely right. If we go to a digital future, we need to be able to take everyone with us, and that must mean that there have to be non-digital options available to those who aren't able to take them up.
Liz Jarvis.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My constituent John wrote to me to highlight the issue of slow and weak internet connectivity in Boyett Wood in my constituency. Meanwhile, constituents who live in the centre of Eastleigh regularly struggle to get online. Does the Minister agree with me that all my constituents deserve access to fast and reliable broadband? And what assurances can he give them that this is a priority for the government?
Minister.
I would argue that they not only have a right to good broadband, and if she wants to come along to one of my drop-in sessions for BD UK, she'd be very welcome, and we can go through it street by street if necessary, but also to mobile connectivity. And I bet you there are people in her constituency who, like in every other constituency in the land, think when they look at the Ofcom checker for their constituency that they've got a perfect signal, and they actually know that they don't. That's one of the things that I'm changing with the deal that I've done with Ofcom.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In terms of delivery of innovative products that can provide access in really remote rural areas, there are some really good examples out there and some really good small-scale providers that are doing that. However, in the Cairngorms National Park area, I have an example recently of one that has failed to cease to provide the service unexpectedly. The consumers have been left out on a limb with that. Is it time that, like the energy system, when a provider fails to provide the service, that there is a consumer protection in place for that now?
Well, to be honest, I've long thought that digital connectivity is now akin to connection to electricity or water or any other public utility, and that is, I think, how we should treat the law, and so that, I think, would assist his constituents.
David Taylor.
Question number 4, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Government is committed to supporting innovation in Hertfordshire and right across the entire country. We're investing a record £20.4 billion into R&D this financial year alone. In the last financial year, UKRI invested £67 million into projects in Hertfordshire. For example, over £650,000 was awarded to Copco Limited, based in Hemel Hempstead, to develop a digitally enhanced, low-cost technology in aerostructures.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for his answer. I was fortunate enough to visit the British Standards Institute in Hemel Hempstead recently to see their work helping businesses to deliver better products and drive towards a more sustainable planet. They showed me their research that 78% of UK companies increase turnover and productivity because of their standards. What steps is the government doing to support more companies to adopt and certify standards like the BSI's AI management system standard, so that we can grow the UK tech sector and enable innovation, collaboration safely and securely?
I'm extremely grateful for his question. It shows how diligently and how assiduously he is working for the businesses in his constituency. I can assure him that standards and high standards lead to adoption, and this government is committed to the very highest of standards. And I saw this on visits to Hertfordshire myself, where I visited Airbus, seeing cutting-edge work being done there in the area in which he represents, and then also to the tech firm Automotive, doing cutting-edge work to the highest of standards, contributing to the innovation of our country as well as to the area that he represents so well.
Can I thank the Minister very much for his answer? The Minister is right to say it's helping not just Hertfordshire but everywhere else. The Minister has been a regular visit to Northern Ireland. He's been a specific interest in cyber security in Northern Ireland. Has he had the opportunity to interact with the companies in Northern Ireland to ensure that we can also benefit from cyber security and expansion in the future?
I'm very grateful for his question, and I'm very grateful for the recognition of the commitment that I personally have to Northern Ireland, visiting for the second time just recently. I can say that this government is committed to cybersecurity right across the United Kingdom. The budgets for it are, and the application of it are subject to the Barnett consequentials. I know that he'll be working with the devolved authority to make sure that that is spent wisely, and in central government here, they will have the partner they need.
Biro Abbey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whilst AI, number 5, excuse me.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my honourable friend for that question. The SIT works very closely with other government departments, including DESNES and DEFRA, to align AI energy demand with future energy planning to ensure long-term sustainability. We understand that AI is a very energy-hungry technology, and that's why we have set up the AI Energy Council. And through this council, Mr. Speaker, we are assessing ways to address the growing energy demands of AI sustainability, including by exploring bold, clean energy solutions from next-generation renewables to small modular reactors.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we know AI has the power to transform civilization. The huge drain on the environment is a problem. So, for example, ChatGPT, which has an estimated 57 million daily users, we're finding that for every 5 to 50 questions it's asked, 500 millilitres of water are used to cool down its data centres. Now, I know she's explained some of the work that's being done, and I understand that AI Energy Council will be looking at energy solutions to align the government's AI ambitions with our net zero goals. But with the increased incidence of drought and the overall climate emergency situation, what steps are the government taking specifically to manage water consumption and sustainability in its AI ambitions?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the honourable member for that question. I can assure her that the government is committed to ensuring AI development aligns with sustainability goals, and we welcome the advances in cooling technology, such as dry cooling and closed-loop systems, in addition to promoting the use of renewable energy resources. And I also want to set out for the honourable member that I chair the AI Ministers group, which brings together ministers from all departments to coordinate cross-cutting challenges, including water.
Sir Roger Gale.
Mr. Speaker, the astonishingly successful Grow Up vertical agriculture project in Sandwich, in my constituency, is highly dependent upon data, which in turn could be hugely assisted by artificial intelligence. Agriculture, as I understand it, is not represented on any of the working parties. Would the Minister seek to make sure both that agriculture is included and, second, possibly find the time to visit the project?
Minister.
I thank the honourable member for that question. As I just set out, we have an interministerial meeting which brings together all the ministers, including ministers from DEFRA, but also the Secretary of State has regularly meets with the NFU and with other Secretaries of State to discuss these issues.
Arson.
Number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to congratulate the Prime Minister and the Business Secretary on the UK-US trade deal, which is, among many provisions, includes the commitments to deepen digital trade. My department will continue to work across Whitehall to strengthen the transatlantic trade relationship that benefits our country so greatly. And when it comes to online harms, we will continue to strengthen those provisions too.
Tom Morris.
Speaker, thank you very much for that response. Many of my constituents have contacted me about concerns around social media and public health. Nearly 40% of children are reporting that social media has a negative impact on their mental health, and with glaring holes in the Online Safety Act, dangerous, smaller websites still remain unregulated. So can the Minister confirm that protections for children will not be up for negotiation in any deal with the United States?
Thank you. I'm grateful for the question, and I certainly share his concern for young people's welfare online, which is why so many of the provisions that have been brought in since I came into office, including issuing a statement of strategic priorities to Ofcom, tackling intimate image abuse, getting right behind the implementation of the new regulations from January and age verification that will come in July. We are behind these, as well as working on what will come next in terms of strengthening it. And let me reassure him in the House, Mr. Speaker, online harms is never up for negotiation. It will never be up for negotiation by this government.
Committee, Chair. Maura.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. And I really welcome the US-UK trade deal and the fact that the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister kept their commitment not to put online safety on the table for those negotiations. Now, my committee's inquiry into social media misinformation and algorithms has heard evidence that the algorithms in social media drive the spread of misinformation, and we saw the consequences of that after the summer riot. Would the Secretary of State confirm that, as well as not watering down the Online Safety Act, he will look to strengthen it, and that he is discussing how to do so with our allies in the US?
I can reassure her that I'm looking very closely about how we strengthen the online safety regime in order to protect children further into the future. I've commissioned research into the exact causal relationship between young people's use of which products and the impact it has on young people, and I will act accordingly from there.
Victoria Collins, Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given these growing concerns around the Online Safety Act that could be weakened during UK-US trade negotiations, and reports of the Right Honourable Peter Kyle, the Secretary of State, meeting with the Right Honourable Secretary of State, repeatedly meeting with tech giants, including Amazon, Google and Meta, it is vital that children's safety remains a red line in both our trade policy and our ongoing evolving data protection framework. I welcome the comments that you made around the online harms will not be up for negotiation, but can the Secretary of State please confirm whether the Online Safety Act will not be up for negotiation at UK-US Trade Act now or in the future?
Mr. Speaker, we have just delivered a deal between the UK and the US, and none of it weakened any of the legislation we have that keeps children safe in this country. We were promised that we were front of the queue for a UK-US trade deal by that party there. For this government, we took us out of the queue altogether and delivered the deal. A decade for them, we deliver the deal, and we are strengthening the rights that young people have to keep them safe, not weakening them.
Luke Murphy.
Question 7, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government is piloting a range of technologies, including generative AI and large language models across departments in order to release their potential to boost public sector productivity. We are aiming for a smarter, smaller state, and that is exactly what we will deliver.
Luke Murphy.
I thank the Secretary of State for his answer. The government is rightly focused on driving public sector reform through the smarter use of technology. In Basingstoke, we've seen what's possible. ICS AI has already helped Derby City Council save millions of pounds using AI. Gemma Secure, another local firm, is developing homegrown tech to help protect vital infrastructure from cyber threats. And TBSC have produced software to reduce costs wasted on unused IT subscriptions by up to 25%. Will the Secretary of State join me in Basingstoke to meet these and other firms to discuss how his department can work with them to help achieve our mission of building a more efficient, secure and modern public sector?
BAI questions is
I'm very grateful for his question. He is highlighting the great work coming out of Basingstoke, which will contribute to the productivity not just of local authorities around the country, but also to the benefit of our entire economy. I can assure him that this government is committed to harnessing the power of British technology, putting it to use for citizens across our country and for productivity in government, and I look forward to engaging more with the companies that he mentions.
Tim Farron.
Speaker, the use of AI in radiotherapy planning increases productivity by 20-fold, and yet the government's decision to stop funding for AI contouring is estimated to cost 500,000 extra days in waiting lists. So will the government intervene and talk to friends in the health department to make sure they restore this funding and save lives?
I'm grateful for his question. I can assure you that we are investing heavily into AI technology across the NHS for the benefit of patients. I visited Huddersfield Hospital, where AI has been integrated fully into the radiography department there. I will look into the specific issue that he raises. If there's any conversations to be had, I can assure you we are on the side of patients and for harnessing technology for the good of patients.
John Minister, Dr. Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Accurate data is important, particularly in the public sector, and we will be voting on this later today. How will he measure his planned productivity improvements, and how will he define success, and over what time period?
I can assure you that we are deploying technology to deliver productivity gains across Whitehall, and they are starting now. We are investing heavily from the digital centre that we created in DCIT, working intensively with departments such as DWP and HMRC, and already identified billions of pounds worth of savings. They will be put to use within government for the benefit of citizens without delay.
Come to topicals, Laura Kirksmith.
Mr. Speaker.
Today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government is harnessing the power of technology to create smarter, smaller state. My department is partnering with DWP and HMRC to understand how AI can save taxpayers money and deliver a world-class public services that people deserve. At the same time, we are tearing down the barriers facing businesses who want to invest in Britain. Last month, we welcomed experts from across the energy and tech sectors for the first meeting of the AI Energy Council. We discussed how we can use clean energy power to power our domestic AI sector and deliver strong growth and good jobs right across the country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm Jess and Hannah from Aston Clinton in my constituency, who are doing brilliant work to encourage parents to delay giving their children smartphones. Responding to the second reading of the Safer Phones Bill, the Digital Minister agreed that excessive smartphone usage is detrimental to the physical, mental and spiritual health of young people, and confirmed that the government intends to act in this area. Can the Secretary of State share what his next steps will be?
Yes. I agree with her. Excessive use is detrimental to children, as it is for MPs across the House too. I can assure her that I'm commissioning evidence into the impact of social media use on children. I'm looking closely, particularly at the addictive nature of some of the algorithms being deployed, and looking closely at how we can act into the future to keep children safe, but also benefit their welfare.
The Secretary of State, Alan Mack.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Labour have cancelled Britain's new national supercomputer at Edinburgh University, damaging our research capability and economic growth. The project was fully funded by the Conservatives, and the university say it will be a disaster if the cancellation isn't reversed. So will the government reinstate that supercomputer, or will it be another victim of the Chancellor's failed economic experiment?
It does surprise me that he continues down this path. As the Secretary of State, I came in and one of the first decisions I had to take was how we look at an unfunded commitment for hundreds of millions of pounds where the money never existed, the Treasury had not committed it, and not a single letter of writing going to my department from the Treasury, and yet years of commitments verbally from this government. We will deliver a compute strategy that is fit for purpose, that will get our country where it needs to be, and every word of it will be delivered.
We're not going to get everybody in, Secretary of State. Alan Mack.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was fully funded and he knows it. Mr. Speaker, while Labour cancels our tech investment, our competitors, the US, Germany and Japan, are all increasing theirs. Next month, the Chancellor will cut his department's budget in real terms. So can he tell us today, will he allow the Treasury to cancel more investment in Britain's future, or will he finally speak up for Britain's vital tech sector?
Secretary of State.
We will release a compute strategy, and that compute strategy will be fully funded and it will be fully delivered, unlike the government that he was part of, which let our country down.
John Slinger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are incredible dividends from digital government administration and service delivery, but some older and vulnerable constituents tell me they cannot use smartphones or are not online and are worried about being left behind. Now, I'm liaising with Citizens Advice, the local council, Age Concern and others to take action locally to help them. Can the Minister reassure me that sufficient advice, support and funding will be made available to them and my constituents to ensure digital inclusion as we rightly seek to utilise digital far more effectively?
Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. There are older people and others, for that matter, who have no access to either online or don't have a smartphone, who wouldn't be able to access things in a digital world. That's why we introduced a digital inclusion plan. And that's one of the key differences between a Labour government and a Tory government. They didn't have any interest in digital inclusion. They didn't have a plan for 10 years, and we brought one in.
Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, can I welcome into the gallery the speakers of Anguilla, Bermuda, British Virgin Islands, the Falkland Islands, Gibraltar, Montserrat and St Helena. Lorraine Beavers.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Question number 1.
Mr Speaker, over the past week we've secured a historic trade deal with India and a landmark agreement with the United States, protecting and creating British jobs, slashing tariffs and driving economic growth. We've also published a white paper setting out how this government will end the open borders experiment of the party opposite, bringing net migration down, backing British workers and delivering fair control of our borders. Mr Speaker, I know the whole House will also want to mark the 40th anniversary of the Bradford City fire. We remember the victims of that devastating tragedy and celebrate the strength of the community. Mr Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. 14 years of Conservative cuts have stripped the Environment Agency of the resources and the staff they need to properly deal with badly managed landfill sites, blighting communities like mine. The Jameson Road landfill site in my constituency of Blackpool North and Fleetwood has been producing toxic stenches for over a year now, causing nosebleeds, headaches, vomiting and breathing problems for my residents. Will the Prime Minister commit to ensure the Environment Agency have the staff and resources to police badly managed sites like this and across the country so they can act swiftly and effectively to protect communities like mine?
Mr Speaker, I love the fact when anyone says 14 years of a Conservative government, they'll go, oh no, that's how the country feels. Mr Speaker, once again, a hard-working Labour MP clearing up the mess that was left behind. Our residents deserve far better. We expect rapid improvements. We're closely monitoring air quality and won't hesitate to take further action. She's right, we must tackle rogue operators who blight our communities. That's why we've boosted Environment Agency funding by £188 million, alongside tough new rules on incinerators and commercial fly tippers.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Bennett.
If I may, Mr Speaker, Sir Roy Stone served 13 chief whips and prime ministers from Margaret Thatcher to Boris Johnson, and I'd like to pay tribute to his extraordinary service and send my best wishes to his family. And also, before we start, Mr Speaker, I would like to say to the Prime Minister how horrified I was to hear about the attack on his family home. It is completely unacceptable, and I think I speak for the whole House when I say that this wasn't just an attack on him, but on all of us and on our democracy. Yesterday, we learned that unemployment is up 10% since the election. Why does the Prime Minister think unemployment is rising on his watch?
Mr Speaker, can I pay tribute to Roy Stone as well and the service that was given us in various capacities. Can I thank her for her words about the attacks on me and my family and the kind messages from many others in the last few days. She did actually message me pretty well straight away, and I really do appreciate that. And she's absolutely right that this is an attack on all of us, on democracy and the values that we stand for. Mr Speaker, she comes here every week to talk the country down. We've got 200,000 new jobs, record investment, 4 interest rates cut. Contrast that to the disastrous Liz Truss mini-budget, inflation through the roof and a £22 billion black hole.
I'm not sure the Prime Minister even knew that unemployment was up, but there's no point him blaming everyone else. The fact is, Conservatives reduced the deficit every year until the pandemic, more than doubled the personal allowance. We left 4 million extra jobs, tackled the post-pandemic inflation spike, and left the fastest-growing economy in the G7. Let's talk about what is happening today. Let's look at Beals, a 180-year-old department store in Dorset. They survived 2 world wars and the winter of discontent. But they couldn't survive this Labour government. Beals is having, and I quote, Mr. Speaker, a Rachel Reeves closing down sale. What does the Prime Minister have to say to all the people who have lost their jobs?
Mr. Speaker, nobody wants to see job losses, but she must be the only person left in the country who thinks the economy was booming after the last government. We've created new jobs, record investment, trade deals that they tried. The India deal, I think they tried for 8 years and failed. We did that deal. They talked about a US deal. We did that deal. We tend to get a stronger relationship with the EU. The former Trade Minister must be the only former Trade Minister who's against all trade deals which boost our economy. She says she's against the India deal, even though it's got the same provisions she put on the table. She's against the US deal, even though it saves thousands of jobs in car manufacturing. And, Mr. Speaker, most absurdly, she says she's going to rip up the EU deal when she hasn't even seen what's on the page. They're reduced to a brain rot. A once great political party is sliding into brain-dead oblivion.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to welcome his tiny tariff deal, but the fact is, it has put us in a worse position than we were in March. He should not over-egg the pudding. Let's talk about how things are getting worse now. In every month of this year, household names like Sainsbury's, Tesco, Asda and Santander have cut staff. The ONS estimates that there are 100,000 fewer jobs than a year ago. And this was before his jobs tax, which will make things worse. Can the Prime Minister promise the House that by this time next year, unemployment will be lower than it is today?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think she just said a tiny tariff deal. Can I suggest that she gets the train to Solihull, 2 hours, goes to speak to the workforce at JLR, their families, and their communities, to tell them she would rip up the deal that protects their jobs. And when she's done that, she might travel across to Scunthorpe and tell the steelworkers there she's going to rip up the deal that saves their jobs. And then if she's got time, go up to Scotland and talk to the whisky distilleries. Tell them she'd rip up the deal that's creating 1,200 jobs for them, boosting their exports, and then come back here next week and tell us what reaction she got.
I didn't hear a promise to get unemployment down, and that's because he knows things are going to get worse. And this goes wider than businesses. Last week, I met staff and patients at Farley Hospice. They do fantastic work, but they need to find an additional £250,000 to pay the jobs tax. How does he suggest Farley Hospice, a charity which relies on donations, pays for his tax hike?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have provided £100 million boosting for the sector, and Children and Young Person Hospitals received £26 million funding this year. But, Mr. Speaker, she turns up every week to cart from the sidelines. But what she doesn't do, she moans about what we had to do in the budget to stabilise the economy. But she hasn't got the courage to stand there and say that she would reverse the next decisions that we take. And I know why. It's because she doesn't want to say she's against the £26 billion investment in our NHS. She doesn't want to say she's against the £1.2 billion more for our police. She doesn't want to say she's against the £3.2 billion more for our schools. All the time she doesn't have the courage of her convictions. It shows that her criticism is totally confected.
Mr. Speaker, I can't believe the Prime Minister is still using this figure. We had this very conversation at the dispatch box. He knows it is just capital spending. It's either he's not paying attention or he is saying things to disguise what is going on. That money will not pay for the jobs tax. He knows that, and the hospices know it too. And the other people who know that things are getting worse are the 5 leading business groups in the UK. They say that his so-called employment rights bill will be deeply damaging to growth. Does the Prime Minister accept that they are right, or does he believe that he knows better than business?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's the same old Tories. Every time better rights for workers are on the table, they vote against them. Respect and dignity and protection at work are good for workers, good for the economy and good for growth.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister needs to listen to business. You cannot have employment rights without employment. Labour always forgets that it is not government that creates growth, it is business that creates growth. And businesses are closing, and they are blaming him and his Chancellor. There are 100,000 fewer jobs, Mr. Speaker. Hospices, charities, nurseries, they are facing bills from the jobs tax that they cannot afford. Even the unions say workers are being thrown on the scrap heap. And all of this before his unemployment bill makes hiring even more expensive. When will he admit that Labour isn't working?
Mr. Speaker, she says we should listen to She should listen to business.
I will have the last... Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, she should listen to business. They're in favour of our trade deals. The India deal, fantastic deal. Tariffs on cars cut to 10%. Whisky and gin, tariffs halved. £4.8 billion into our economy. What does she say she'd do with the India deal? She wants to rip it up. The US deal that saves thousands upon thousands of jobs. What does she want to do? She wants to rip it up. The EU deal, good for our economy. She's not going to even wait to see what it says. She absurdly says she's going to rip it up. It is so unserious. She even was reduced last week to calling the Indian government, accusing them of fake news. No wonder she did so badly as a Trade Secretary. Mr. Speaker, the project for them is over. They're sliding into oblivion. They're a dead party walking.
Rachel Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thousands of British jobs have been safeguarded by this government's trade agreement with the US. Including those in my constituency who work for Jaguar Land Rover, like my next-door neighbour Ollie, proving that when Labour negotiates, workers win. Can the Prime Minister confirm to me that he will continue to stand up for all workers and our vital motor manufacturing industry as he negotiates a better deal for Britain around the world?
Well, can I pay tribute to her for her work with JLR, standing up for the jobs in her constituency? The deal that we've agreed saves thousands of jobs in our car industry, securing the livelihoods of countless families. And, Mr. Speaker, I've been up to JLR on a number of occasions, including last week. I know firsthand what it means for their workforce, for their families and for their communities. And the Leader of the Opposition says she would go and tell them she's going to rip it up. She should go up there. She says she's going to go against it. The Reform leader said, what did he say about JLR? He said JLR deserves to go bust. Shame on him. Labour are striking deals in the national interest.
The Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on behalf of my party, can I offer heartfelt congratulations to His Holiness, Pope Leo XIV? And can I offer our support to the Prime Minister and his family after the appalling arson attacks on his home? And can I echo his thanks to our brilliant police and firefighters? Mr. Speaker, 3 years ago, the previous government was faced with a choice. Their own Migration Advisory Committee told ministers that recruiting more care workers required improved conditions, career progression and better pay. But the Conservatives chose not to do that and instead brought in large numbers of care workers from overseas. Now, those carers looking after our loved ones in care homes should be thanked, not demonised. But will the Prime Minister do now the things the Conservatives refused to do, starting with a higher minimum wage for carers?
Prime Minister.
Can I first thank him for his comments about myself and my family? I do really appreciate it. It is important that we have fair pay for care workers, and that's why we've put in place our fair pay agreements. This is the first of its type. It will be applied first to care workers to ensure that they get fair pay, but also a better framework for progression. As he will know, Most people leaving care work are leaving care work to go to the NHS because of the pay and the ability to progress. Our fair pay agreements will deal with that to make sure that in the future those jobs are more secure. And I would just add, Mr. Speaker, a declaration of interest. My sister is a care worker. I know firsthand how important the work is and how difficult sometimes the situation is facing them.
Shred Davey.
For that reply, it's a good first step, but we'll still be seeing people earning more in Amazon warehouses and supermarkets than care homes, and that will mean our loved ones going without the care that they need. But turning to the Middle East now, Mr. Speaker, for more than 10 weeks, Israeli forces have blocked food, water and medicine getting into Gaza. There is now a humanitarian catastrophe with 2 million people at risk of famine and 1 in 5 facing starvation. Rather than ending this crisis, the Netanyahu government is planning to seize all Gaza indefinitely. Now, I know the Prime Minister will agree that the blockade to Gaza should end, and I'm sure he would agree that it would be appalling if Netanyahu proceeds with that escalation. But will he act now and pick up the phone to President Trump for a joint plan to recognise Palestine and get food, water and medicine into Gaza?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank him for raising this because the situation in Gaza is simply intolerable and getting worse. And we are working with other leaders urgently to bring about rapid and unimpeded flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza, which is desperately needed, obviously alongside the release of hostages, and to get back to a ceasefire, and that work is going on through my team 24/7. I do believe that is the initial action that needs to be taken, but I still fundamentally believe that however remote it may seem at the moment, the pathway to a two-state solution is the only way for settled and lasting peace in the Middle East, and we will continue with our allies to pursue that path.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Found in my constituency, Durdle Door is one of the most iconic bathing sites in all the country. So last Friday, I was joined at Durdle Door by my honourable friends, the members for Bournemouth East, Bournemouth West, Poole, and most importantly, Ron, the local seal, to test the water quality at Durdle Door. Currently, water quality testing at bathing sites is only monitored from mid-May to September, which puts the health of all water users at risk who could be potentially swimming in pollution or sewage. With this in mind, will the Prime Minister work with me and my honourable friends to introduce all year-round testing at popular bathing sites such as Durdle Door?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, everyone enjoying our beautiful beaches, lakes and rivers is entitled to know that the water is clean and safe. That's why we're modernising outdated bathing water regulations, including more regular monitoring of sites to reflect local demand. And after years of failure by the party opposite, we're acting through our plan for change through new powers to tackle pollution, including banning bonuses, jail terms for law-breaking bosses and real-time monitors of every sewage outlet.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
This Prime Minister once spoke of compassion and dignity for migrants and for defending free movement. Now he talks of islands of strangers and taking back control. Somebody here has to call this out, Mr. Speaker. It seems the only principle he consistently defends is whichever he last heard in a focus group. So I ask him, is there any belief he holds which survives a week in Downing Street?
Yes, the belief that she talks rubbish. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I want to lead a country where we pull together and walk into the future as neighbours and as communities, not as strangers. And the loss of control of migration by the last government put all of that at risk. And that's why we're fixing the system based on principles of control, selection and fairness.
Jonathan Brash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Council tax is the most regressive and unfair tax in this country. It has become a tax on deprivation. The less affluent an area, the more you pay. The greater your need, the more you pay. A Band D property in Westminster pays just £1,017 a year. In Hartlepool, it's £2,495 a year. For a Band H property, the difference between those two areas is £3,000. It is hammering people in towns like Hartlepool. Does the Prime Minister agree that this unfairness cannot continue, and will he commit to addressing this inequality once and for all?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend. He's been a dedicated campaigner on this for a very long time. As he knows, 14 years of mismanagement by the party opposite left councils on their knees with a total failure to improve and update how councils are funded. Through £69 billion of funding this year and the upcoming multi-year settlement, the first in over a decade, will give councils far greater certainty and stability. Our detailed funding review will create a fairer system to make sure his constituents see strong, affordable local services.
Wendy Moore.
Mr. Speaker, while the Prime Minister prefers to take to the international stage, back here at home, Labour's Birmingham bin strike is now in its 10th week. Rubbish is still piled on the streets and recycling goes uncollected. And the reputation of the West Midlands is being trashed. His ministers continue to wash their hands of this. His mayor doesn't even want to talk about it. So will the Prime Minister come to the West Midlands and sort this out? Because at the moment, it's only the squeaky blinders that are winning.
Prime Minister.
Well, further evidence, Mr. Speaker, of the decline of the Tory party when they say that going to Ukraine at the weekend to try and secure peace for Ukraine and for Europe and the security and defence of Europe is somehow the wrong priority. That conflict has already massively impacted people in this country through the cost of living crisis and energy. Ukraine, Europe and we deserve peace and to live in peace. Mr. Speaker, on dealing with the bin strikes is the priority. We continue to call on Unite to suspend the strike immediately and bring the disruption to an end. We are supporting the Council to ramp up the cleaning operation and now collecting over 1,100 tonnes of waste every day and continue to offer our support so the backlog doesn't reappear.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, I visited Sacred Heart Primary School in Hyndburn, where the excellent teachers expressed their frustration at the current SEND system. One wonderful boy, who, despite being non-verbal and requiring personal support, has been waiting for over 18 months for an EHCP, and there is a risk now that he won't get a place in a school for the year ahead that suits his needs. How will the Prime Minister ensure that the voices of parents and children are at the heart of the SEND reforms that the government will bring forward?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend. She's a powerful champion on this issue. Our principle is that every young person with special education needs should receive the right support to succeed. We've immediately announced an additional £1 billion for high needs funding, including almost £20 million for schools in Lancashire. We will support special schools and deliver truly inclusive places and expertise in mainstream schools to help every child thrive.
Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We at Reform, a party that is alive and kicking, very much enjoyed your speech on Monday. You seem to be learning a very great deal from us. But can I encourage you, please, to go further as a matter of national security? As a matter of national security. Over the weekend, an illegal immigrant from Iran, who we believe came by boat, was arrested in the north of England on serious charges of terrorism. Since the speech on Monday, 1,000 young, undocumented young males have crossed the English Channel. Does the Prime Minister agree? Now is the time to declare the situation in the English Channel as a national security emergency.
It wasn't my speech, it was the Prime Minister's.
Mr. Speaker, the situation is serious. The last government lost control of the borders. We are taking powers. The Borders Bill, precisely to his point, the Borders Bill is the first bill to give terrorism-like powers to law enforcement, precisely so that we can get in before the crimes are committed, before people get to this country. That's why this is the most far-reaching provision ever for law enforcement to defend and secure our borders. And that's why it is extraordinary that he, of all people, voted against it. And sooner or later he's going to have exploded.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, since my election, I've been championing and backing our country's plumbers, builders, electricians and all trades. These are not the people just building Britain, but holding all of our communities together. That's why I've been campaigning for tougher sentencing and action on tool theft, and for the real cost of this crime to be recognised. I want to firstly thank everyone in the sector who's backed the campaign, because together we've shown that the message is clear. 14 years of government neglect. It's time for action and change. Will the Prime Minister work with me, the Secretary of State for Justice, and myself to include my bill as we review sentencing and justice so the punishment finally fits this crime?
Can I commend my honourable friend? She's led the campaign to highlight the devastating impact of these crimes. Mr. Speaker, for hard-working small businesses, the theft of tools isn't just a violation. It can mean thousands of pounds of potential work lost, with a huge impact to businesses and to families. We're investing over £1.2 billion extra into policing, with 13,000 new neighbourhood police to focus on crimes that impact on communities the most. And I pay tribute to my honourable friend, and I know the Justice Secretary will look at the details carefully.
Andrew Stone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Whether you agree with the Prime Minister's net zero targets or not, I'm sure the Prime Minister will agree that you won't achieve them, or he won't achieve them, without taking people with him. The cabling corridor, substation corridor for the Morgan and Morecambe offshore wind farm is now one of the most objected to national energy infrastructure projects in the country. And what is angering myself and thousands of others is that there is a perfectly alternative cabling route further up the coastline, which would actually have local economic benefit, would be more cost-effective as a whole life cycle project and could connect to existing national grid infrastructure. But no one is listening. So will the Prime Minister now listen and pause the planning inquiry for the existing application and ask the Department to consider and cost the alternative route to avoid untold devastation to our coastline and countryside?
Can I thank him for his question? As he will know, the Secretary of State is going through a quasi-judicial exercise, and therefore I'm limited in what I can say, but let me do the best I can within those constraints, because the project is going through its examination, where interested parties can put forward their views on the application and should do so. And more broadly, as we drive forward renewable projects, the planning process is designed to ensure impacts are carefully considered. Thank you.
Fred Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The United Kingdom has rightly helped arm Ukraine with modern, effective capability, and we're sending them some £4.5 billion this year. But after decades of relying on the peace dividend, our own forces are ill-equipped for modern warfare. With colleagues interested in defence technology, I'm developing a proposal for a joint UK-Ukraine production hub on British soil. This would support Ukraine while also modernising our own forces at warfighting scale and creating the jobs and know-how needed to rearm and stay secure. Will the Prime Minister use his good offices to help support this proposal?
Prime Minister.
Well, my honourable and gallant friend is right that our ironclad support for Ukraine should go hand in hand with firing up our own defence industries. And that means well-paid, secure jobs right across the country, including in Plymouth, and strengthening national security. We reiterated our support for Ukraine in Kyiv last weekend, and I'm proud that British industries are playing their part supporting Ukraine against Russia's illegal invasion. I'll make sure that he meets the relevant minister to discuss his proposal.
John Long.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. People in the real world are disgusted by the Energy Secretary's obsessive pursuit of net zero at any cost. The Scottish Borders is under attack, with solar farms the size of towns, massive wind farms and now mega pylons scarring unspoilt landscapes. Nobody sensible supports his crazed crank policies that will put jobs at risk and rip up farmland. So when will the Prime Minister step in and stop his Energy Secretary throwing taxpayers' money at this nonsense?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, only a few years ago, dealing with the climate challenge was a shared endeavour across this House. And it's yet further evidence of how far his party has fallen, that they cannot see the significance and importance of tackling one of the major challenges of our time. I think we should rise to that challenge, not be defeatist about it. And it's further evidence, as far as I can see, that the Tory project is just finished.
Jake Richards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Male suicide is a tragic epidemic in our country. Each week, almost 100 men take their own lives, and suicide is the biggest killer of men aged under 50. In my constituency, I'm working with Andy's Man Club in Maltby, the learning community in Dinnington, and Better Today in Kiverton Park to try and raise awareness about the fantastic groups who offer support for men in the most difficult circumstances. Will the Prime Minister use this opportunity to support the campaign that we are undertaking in my constituency, and also reassure those groups and my constituents that mental health services for men will be a priority for his government?
Can I thank him for raising this crucial issue? And across the House, I know members will have their own personal and tragic experiences of suicide. Mr. Speaker, we've launched a call for evidence on our men's health strategy, which will improve men's health in all parts of the country, including tackling devastatingly high suicide rates. We're also investing £26 million in new mental health crisis centres, funding talking therapies for 380,000 more people and recruiting 8,500 more mental health workers.
Bobby Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The plans to upgrade St Helier Hospital, including the delivery of a new specialist emergency care building, have been put back by 10 years. Now, I'm talking with the Trust about a way to bring all or part of those plans forward, but in the meantime, they have a very real fear that some of the buildings on the existing estate are at risk of catastrophic failure before the decade is out. So can the government reassure me that they'll work with the local trust on a plan to maintain and adapt the existing estate to ensure that St Helier Hospital can survive all the way through to the major works being complete?
The honourable member's constituents have been badly let down by the previous government's empty promises, which we're never going to deliver. We put the new hospitals programme on a sustainable financial footing, increasing the NHS capital budget to record levels so we can address the backlog of critical maintenance, repairs and upgrades. And I'll make sure that he gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss the particular case.
Melanie On.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes is the renewable energy capital of England, delivering homegrown, secure energy and boosting local skills. And over 12,000 people are employed in a clean energy job in Greater Lincolnshire. But these jobs are now under threat from Reform's new mayor, who has declared war on renewables, putting livelihoods at risk. What steps will the Prime Minister take to protect jobs by supporting the supply chain and delivery of renewable projects?
Mr. Speaker, she's a superb champion for energy security, driving down bills and the good secure jobs that renewables offer. And the parties opposite are climate defeatists. Anti-jobs, anti-growth, anti-business and anti-investment. And they should go and peddle their policies to the tens of thousands of people, working people in this country, working in renewables every single day. They don't think that Britain has the skills and they would deny us incredible opportunities. We're focused on securing billions in investment, creating tens of thousands of jobs and taking us off the roller coaster of an international fossil fuels.
Alison Griffiths.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A constituent of mine, Victor Franklin, was made severely disabled after a savage dog attack left him with multiple amputations. Will the Prime Minister explain why pensioners like Victor, who become severely disabled after retirement, are excluded from claiming personal independence payments and are instead limited to the lesser support of attendance allowance? And will he commit to reviewing this unfair rule?
Prime Minister. Can I extend my thoughts to Victor and the awful circumstances that she describes must be extremely challenging. We do have to reform the system that we've got. It's not working. I think there's a general agreement about that, but the principles have to be clear, that we protect and secure those that need that protection and security. We help those who can work into work, and those who can work should work. But we have to reform the system that we've got to make it a better system, because what we've got doesn't work.
Nigel Kaliska.
Mr. Speaker. Every week I meet families in Barking and Dagenham who tell me that they worry about paying for their bills because they are on a 0-hour contract. My constituents want the chance to work hard in a secure job, earn a decent wage and to have dignity in their workplace. As Labour plans for change delivers the biggest uplift in workers' rights in a generation, does the Prime Minister agree with me that Reform MPs working and voting against our employment rights bill show that they are no friend of workers in this country?
She's absolutely right. Let's be clear what the parties opposite voted against. Stronger statutory sick pay, they voted against. The right to guaranteed hours, they voted against. Protection from unfair dismissal, they voted against. Stronger protection for pregnant mothers, they voted against. Insecure work, a package worth £600 to the poorest workers, they voted against. Mr. Speaker, we're backing British workers. They vote against them at every turn.
Adam Dance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Maternity services in Yeovil are due to shut on Monday after a deeply flawed CQC inspection in January and be moved to Musgrove Park Hospital in Taunton, which does not have the capacity for an extra 1,300 births a year. While the closure is initially for 6 months, I've received no guarantee it will open again. This creates huge fear. Will the Prime Minister or relative minister agree to meet with me and colleagues in the South West to stop this decision?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to him for raising this issue, which must be of concern. I'm not across the details of it, I'm afraid, at this stage, but I will make sure that he gets a meeting with the relevant minister to get to the bottom of the issue that he's described.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. Point of order, Jake Richards.
Mr. Speaker, at Prime Minister's questions, the Leader of the Opposition claimed that unemployment had risen by 10% since the last general election. That figure is completely and utterly incorrect. It's no wonder that George Osborne, a former Conservative Chancellor, says she's got no economic plan if she can't even get basic statistics right. Will she return to the House and correct the record?
It's not up to the Chair for the accuracy of what a member states. What I would say is you've corrected the record in your opinion, and we'll leave it at that for now. Bench changeover. Come to the urgent question. Adrian Ramsey.
Mr. Speaker, to ask the Secretary of State for FCDO if he will make a statement on the UK's assessment of the likelihood of genocide in Gaza.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday, alongside partners, the UK convened a meeting of the UN Security Council in response to the intolerable civilian suffering and humanitarian need in Gaza. As I told this House yesterday, Israel's denial of aid is appalling. Tons of food are currently sitting, rotting, at the Gaza-Israel border, blocked from reaching people who are starving. Israeli ministers have said Israel's decision to block this aid is a pressure lever. This is cruel and it is indefensible. Overnight, yet more Palestinians have been killed in Israeli strikes. This must end. The message yesterday was clear. The world demands Israel stop and change course immediately. With our allies, we are telling the government of Israel, lift the block on aid entering Gaza now. Enable the UN and all humanitarians to save lives now. We need an immediate ceasefire now. Humanitarian aid must never be used as a political tool or military tactic, and the UK will not support any aid mechanism that seeks to deliver political or military objectives or puts vulnerable civilians at risk. The International Court of Justice case on genocide is ongoing, Mr. Speaker. We support the ICJ. We support its independence. The ICJ issued a set of provisional measures in this case, and we support those measures. Israel has an obligation to implement them. It is the UK government's long-standing position that any formal determination as to whether genocide has occurred is a matter for a competent court and not for governments or non-judicial bodies. The UK is fully committed to upholding our responsibilities under domestic and international law, and we have at all times acted in a manner consistent with our legal obligations, including under the Genocide Convention. The devastation from this conflict must end, Mr. Speaker. Our complete focus is on lifting Israeli restrictions on aid, on freeing the hostages, on protecting civilians, and on restoring the ceasefire. We will work urgently with our allies and partners on further pressure to make Israel change course.
Mr. Speaker, overnight, the UN's Emergency Relief Coordinator, Tom Fletcher, warned that a genocide was possible in Gaza. 1 in 5 people faces starvation. The entire population is facing high levels of acute food insecurity. In Gaza, Gaza North, Deir al-Balah, Khan Yunis and Rafah, there is a risk of famine. And there's one primary cause: Israel's aid blockade since the 2nd of March. The Security Council were told that civilians in Gaza have again been forcibly displaced and confined into ever-shrinking spaces, with 80% of the territory either within Israeli militarised zones or under displacement orders. Israeli airstrikes on the European hospital in Gaza yesterday killed 28 people, with further reports of at least 48 deaths overnight from strikes elsewhere. So can he tell us whether the FCDO has conducted any recent assessment of its own on the risk that the Israeli authorities are committing genocide? Last night, the UK's ambassador to the UN rightly called on Israel to lift the restrictions and ensure a return to delivery of aid in Gaza in line with humanitarian principles and international law. But this is not enough. Notwithstanding the government's position that it's for judicial bodies to make a determination, what is the minister's response to the latest UN assessment that genocide is possible in Gaza? Can he confirm whether the UK stands by the obligation to prevent duty in the Genocide Convention? Parliament needs to know whether the UN Emergency Relief Coordinator's assessment will lead to a shift in the UK government's position. Why is it that when the horrors increase, the UK government's position stays the same? And lastly, to echo the words in Tom Fletcher's briefing, will you act decisively to prevent genocide and ensure respect for international humanitarian law, or will you instead repeat the empty words, "We did all we could"?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for asking these important questions. The testimony of the Emergency Relief Coordinator, the very most senior official in the entire humanitarian system in the world, last night at the UN Security Council meeting that we called with our allies, is clearly incredibly important. And I can confirm to the honourable member that we do abide by our international law obligations, including to the Genocide Convention, and we consider in all of our IHL assessments, which are ongoing, all of the relevant tests, and we will continue to do so. The honourable gentleman, Mr. Speaker, asks important questions, questions which have echoed in this chamber yesterday and throughout this long and painful conflict. This government has taken steps, whether it's restoring funding, suspending arms exports, working with our partners in the UN and elsewhere, but clearly we are in a situation today where nobody in this House would wish to be, nobody on these benches, and I'm sure nobody on the benches opposite. We will need to take more and more action until we see the change that we need. But the central question, as I've told this House repeatedly, the central question is that aid is not being allowed into Gaza. While it is not allowed into Gaza, there is nothing that can be done to get the aid at the scale and in the manner necessary to save Palestinian life. And it is on that point that we call the Security Council, and on that point we will continue to act.
Can I just remind people not to use you, because I'm not responsible for some of those statements. Right. Andy MacDonald, you put also a UKIP.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister has repeatedly said that we do everything to observe international law. Will he please accept that there is a growing body of opinion that says the UK is not doing that, they're not complying with our obligations? And we are not doing so if we continue to supply parts to the F-35 programme. These are the weapons that are dropping on children in Gaza. We cannot say that we're observing the Genocide, Geneva Conventions and Rome Statutes if we continue to supply those goods. And he talks about doing all that we could. If that's the case, then why on earth are we not making it abundantly clear to Israel that trading with them is not an option whilst this continues? So the answer to the question, is he doing all that he could? Because there's many people in this place and beyond who think we are not.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend. I know his commitment to these issues over a long period of time. I don't accept the premise of his question. Whether or not we abide by our legal obligations is indeed a question that will be determined by the courts. It's being determined by the courts this week. And so I will leave it to the courts to make judgments on our obligations. We are taking all of the steps that we can to bring this conflict to a close. He mentions the vital questions of the F-35 programme. I know this House understands the significance of that programme, not just in Europe, but across the world. The carve-out that we have put in place, we have done so on the basis of robust legal advice which is being tested in the courts this week. We must abide by our obligations to our allies. We are not selling F-35s directly to the Israeli authorities. We continue to supply a global spares pool, which is necessary for the continued function of the F-35 programme, which has critical importance to European security. We make these judgments calmly and soberly, and we will continue to do so.
Shadow Minister Wendible.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The situation in the Middle East continues to cause concern. That's why, on this side of the House, we've been clear. We need to see the return of the hostages and a lasting ceasefire. And while we welcome the release of Eden Alexander, there are still 58 hostages held in Gaza by the Iranian-backed terrorists. Those who are still alive are being held in the most dreadful and appalling conditions, without access to aid and medicines. And what they and their families have been going through for approaching 600 days is unimaginable. They must be released as a matter of urgency. So can the Minister give an update on the diplomatic steps being taken by the government to secure the release of the remaining hostages? And what is Britain contributing to those efforts? This conflict would have been over long ago had Hamas released them, and the House should not be in any doubt that Hamas and their Iranian sponsors are committed to wiping out the State of Israel. So can the Minister tell us what steps are being taken with international partners to deal with the threat to peace, security and stability posed by Iran? We have constantly asked for a strategy to tackle Iran, so when will this come forward? The government has shared our view that Hamas can have no role in the future governance of Gaza. So can we have an update on the practical steps the government is taking to secure this outcome and end of the misery that Hamas is inflicting on Gaza and the threat they pose to Israel? Mr. Speaker, we've debated aid access to Gaza on several occasions, including in recent days. So can the Minister tell us exactly how much UK-funded aid, both directly and indirectly through multilateral organisations, is waiting to enter Gaza, and what a breakdown of that aid is? The government has known for a number of months about the concerns Israel has about the delivery of aid to Gaza and aid diversion. So can the Minister today explain what discussions have taken place with Israel and what practical solutions ministers have offered to support the delivery of aid that addresses their concerns? And has the Minister been directly engaged in the discussions that have taken place with Israel and the US over alternative ways to get aid into Gaza? Does he have a view on this, and will the UK be participating? We have also been clear that while we continue to press for humanitarian aid and accountability, we do not consider the actions in Gaza to constitute genocide. This case brought by South Africa to the International Court of Justice is not helping in advance.
Please, can we please stick to the time? It was almost a minute over. We've got to work within the timescales. Please, if we can time speeches, lots of members need to get in. We've got to support each other. I think the Minister's got enough to go.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, of course, welcome, as the Foreign Secretary did yesterday, the release of Eden Alexander. I know this whole House thinks of those hostages who remain in Hamas captivity. I have been in direct contact with American officials involved in that release, and it is a very welcome development. We are focused on ensuring that a future for Gaza has no role for Hamas. We are working as part of the Arab Reconstruction Plan in order to try and achieve that. The Honourable Lady asks an important question about what proportion of British aid is unable to get in to Gaza at the moment. Of course, for the last almost 2 months, the horrendous answer is 100%. But even before that, there was very significant restrictions on the aid that we wish to get into Gaza. I saw for myself the items that were unable to cross from Al Arish into Rafah, so the proportions will be very high, but I will see with my officials whether or not I can break it down in greater detail for them.
Susanna Allenkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Slow and agonising breaths, scared, crying, emaciated bodies fighting for every heartbeat. Death by 1,000 cuts for the children and for the parents who were watching their babies deliberately being starved to death. Almost 1 million children at risk of famine and death in Gaza. Those who have stood by and allowed this to happen should hold their heads in shame. I call on this government to sanction Israeli officials until the blockade is lifted, because if we do not act now, this will be on us.
I know the strength of feeling behind my honourable friend's words. I'm sure she is aware of the findings of the IPC report on Monday, which delineates in great detail the precise suffering that is being felt because of a lack of food and nutrition. We are horrified by those findings. The need for action could not be more urgent.
Monica Harding, Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Israel's continuing blockade of Gaza, now exceeding 70 days, is utterly unacceptable. Will the government now recognise that the blockade constitutes a clear violation of international law? The government must respect whatever determination the ICJ reaches regarding genocide. There are already clear obligations on the government to prevent genocide in Gaza, arising from the ICJ's January 2024 order. Has the government taken any steps to meet these obligations? Will the government commit today to banning the export of all UK arms to Israel? Will the government reconsider sanctions on extremist Israeli ministers like Bezalel Smotrich, who called for Gaza to be destroyed? Will the government commit to an immediate recognition of a Palestinian state? And as the UN's British relief chief told the Security Council yesterday, if we have not done all we could to end the violence in Gaza, we should fear the judgment of future generations. Does the Minister agree?
Mr. Speaker, these responsibilities weigh heavily on me and every member of the government and the Foreign Office team. But let us not forget what this government has done, whether it is restoring funding to UNRWA, suspending arms exports in the way that we described, whether it's providing 129 million in humanitarian aid and then being one of the loudest voices in trying to ensure that enters, whether it's working with Jordan to fly medicines into Gaza, Egypt to treat medically evacuated civilians, Project Pure Hope to help Gazan children in the UK, Kuwait to support vulnerable children through UNICEF. We are taking steps. We take the judgments of the ICJ incredibly seriously. But I cannot pretend to the House that the events in the occupied Palestinian territories of recent days are acceptable, and we will continue to take every step we can to get a change of course.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow is the 77th anniversary of the 1948 Nakba, which saw hundreds of thousands of Palestinians displaced from their homes. This still continues today, and the UN Security Council has said action is now required to prevent genocide. A key step to a peaceful two-state solution would be recognizing Palestinian statehood, something Israel is trying to prevent. So with 147 countries recognizing Palestinian statehood, Minister, is now not the right time for the UK to do so too?
Yes. Mr. Speaker, the question of recognition of a Palestinian state is one obviously of vital importance. We want to do so as a contribution to a more stable region. We can see the serious and immediate threats to the viability of Palestinian life, and that is what we are focused on in these most urgent of days.
Far of the House, Edward Lee.
I've been a member of the Conservative Friends of Israel for over 40 years, longer than anybody here. And Hamas is a brutal terrorist organisation that hides people, their own fighters, under hospitals. But it's frankly unacceptable to recklessly bomb a hospital. It's unacceptable to starve a whole people. Is the Minister aware that many friends of Israel worldwide, notwithstanding narrow legal definitions, are asking this moral question: when is genocide not genocide?
Mr. Speaker, I have heard in recent weeks a series of very powerful interventions from the benches opposite, and I take them seriously with the weight that they hold, particularly from the Father of the House and my neighbour in Lincolnshire. We will not move towards making determinations from dispatch boxes on questions of legal determination, but that does not mean we will wait, Mr. Speaker. The preliminary judgments of the ICJ and the provisional measures that they set out are important, and we will abide by them.
Helena Donovan.
Speaker, as the Minister has said, the situation is intolerable, with 1 in 5 Gazans facing starvation, and as he has also said, the use of aid as a weapon of war by Israel is inexcusable. The continued firing of rockets by Hamas and the continued detention of hostages is also inexcusable, and it all must end. So I welcome the UK, with our international allies, calling an urgent briefing on this situation at the UN Security Council, and there the UN Humanitarian Chief was clear in his warning about the dire consequences of this continuing. So can the Minister tell me what steps this Labour government is taking to get more aid in, to get the hostages out and bring about the ceasefire and two-state solution that we all in this House so desperately want to see?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank my honourable friend, who I know has been long committed to these issues and used to be an aid worker herself. She's a doughty advocate on these points. We remain absolutely committed to a two-state solution. We are focusing all of our diplomatic efforts on ensuring that the current approach is changed, that we return to a diplomatic solution, that we have a ceasefire, the release of hostages, and a move back to that two-state solution that, as she so rightly puts it, is vitally important.
Oliver Dowden. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The situation in Gaza is clearly intolerable, and Israel does have to find a way of getting aid in safely and without diversion. But would the Minister agree with me? We need to be very careful about the use of the word genocide, and that we don't devalue this word. This is used to describe the systematic and deliberate murder of 6 million Jews by Nazi Germany. We must question, and I do not believe that a war designed to release hostages and remove a terrorist threat and against a terrorist that hides amongst the civilian population crosses that threshold.
It's the long-standing position of governments of all stripes that it's for international courts to make determinations of this nature, and we will abide by our obligations under international humanitarian law.
Florence Eshalomi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, the reality is that since the 2nd of March, no food or medical aid supplies have reached over 2.3 million Palestinians. The reality is that many of us from across this House have attended many statements, Westminster Hall debates, submitted parliamentary questions, asking the government around this really critical issue. The reality is that those hostages still remain in captivity and they need to be released. But the reality is that by using aid to punish so many people is wrong. Does the Minister agree with me that under the Genocide Convention, the UK, as a state party, has an obligation not only to prevent and punish genocide, but also to avoid actions which may assist or enable genocidal acts?
My honourable friend asks important questions both about aid access and the nature of aid delivery. And I want to be very clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the UK will not support any aid mechanism that seeks to deliver political or military objectives or put vulnerable people at risk. The obligations under international humanitarian law and international law more broadly are clear, and they fall on Israel as the occupying power, and they must abide by them.
Mike Martin.
Madam Deputy Speaker, very few things in politics, particularly international politics, are black or white. However, this is one of those issues. The Israeli government is using collective punishment of the civilian Palestinian population, and this is illegal under international law. In particular, it contravenes the Geneva Conventions, which Israel is a party to. My question is, does the Minister think that the British government has lost its moral and legal compass in continuing its tacit support for Israel?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I have set out some of what this government has done. I could continue for some time, but let me be clear, because the honourable gentleman rightly points out the absolutely appalling nature of any attempt to try and weaponise aid, to try and use incendiary language, which is clearly in breach of international legal obligations. We have condemned from this dispatch box much of that language. Some of that language was repeated by the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, and I want to take the opportunity again to say the British government absolutely condemns that inflammatory language, will continue to do so, and makes our views known in the most forceful possible way with the Israeli government.
Abdisan Mohammed.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The international community have failed to stop Israel's impunity. We have collectively failed to act on the violations as they are committed and to hold Israel to account. And in our collective failure, Palestinians in Gaza face collective punishment. Israeli ministers' statements of stopping humanitarian aid as one of their main levers of pressure is not only cruel and indefensible, they are explicit admissions of violating international law. Minister, I hear our condemnations, but I see no action. Why are we still sending arms? Why are we not sanctioning ministers? The UN have said what many know to be true. We, as a signatory to the Geneva Convention, have a legal obligation to prevent a genocide from taking place. Minister, when will we act?
Madam Deputy Speaker, the member for Sheffield Central, my friend, is a very forceful advocate on these questions, and she points to failure, and I recognise that failure, that we are still so many months on, so many days on, with the people of Gaza, the people of West Bank, and of course the hostages in the most distressing possible circumstances. I won't comment from this dispatch box on sanctions as she would expect, but I can assure her that we will be working urgently with our allies and partners on further pressure to make Israel change course.
Kit Malthouse.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's becoming increasingly difficult to keep up with the slaughter in Gaza, the brutality and cruelty in the West Bank, and starvation as a policy. And the crimes come daily. Crimes such as the recent killing of Mohammed Bardawil, one of only 3 key eyewitnesses to the slaughter of rescue workers just a few weeks ago, their bodies being buried in shallow graves. It's clear to everybody that crimes are being committed daily. Now, as a number of members have pointed out, the UK is a party to international agreements which provide for a positive obligation to act to prevent genocide, torture, to protect the rights of other people. And we have an obligation as a member of the Security Council of the United Nations and as a state party to the Geneva Conventions to promote peace and security. So what advice has the Minister taken as to his own liability in this regard, which will attach to him as a decision maker? And has the government received advice as to whether the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary, or indeed any senior officials or previous ministers may be exposed when the reckoning comes?
Madam Deputy Speaker, as you would expect, I wouldn't discuss internal legal advice in this chamber, whether that applies to me or other ministers of the government. I'd reassure the honourable gentleman that right across the government we understand the gravity of the situation. We understand the weight that now falls to us to try and ensure changes from a trajectory which is diabolical. We will continue to use our role in the Security Council at the G7 and as part of the E3, as we did yesterday, and that action will not stop.
Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the Minister still refuses to address the central issue. Our obligation to prevent genocide under the Rome Statute has already been triggered by the ample evidence in front of us of Israeli war crimes in Gaza. So I ask the Minister, in the week marking 77 years since the Nakba, how many more times will he come to this chamber with just words? Words that do nothing. We need action. And let us be clear, it's not a case of if, but when he will end the UK's complicity in arming a state accused of genocide against the Palestinians, and when he will finally impose widespread sanctions on Israel. And I say this to the Minister, history will judge his delay. Well said.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I would just like to remind the House of the decisions that we took last year. And we have discussed the question of the F-35 global spares pool, where the basis on of which we've made a carve-out is clear and been debated many times. But let me be clear, aside from that carve-out, we took an assessment, we took a solemn duty on becoming the government to make an assessment which did not appear to have been made about a serious risk of potential breaches of international humanitarian law. We then suspended arms export licenses where those weapons could be used in such conduct. That means in Gaza, that means in West Bank, that means in relation to all of the areas where those risks accrued. We took far-reaching action. That action is still in place. We continue to conduct those assessments. I can understand why many members may feel frustrated about the F-35 carve-out. Perhaps they feel frustrated too that we will continue to sell arms which cannot be used, in our view, which could not risk a violation, as according to the assessment much discussed here. But we think it is right that we do continue to, for example, provide body armour that might be used by NGOs in Gaza, that we do provide part of the supply chain that could end up in the hands of NATO allies. We have taken far-reaching action on arms. That is important work which we are proud of.
Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have just returned from the High Court this morning, where his government's lawyers will argue when defending the continued supply of F-35 components that, and I quote, "The evidence available does not support a finding of genocide, and certainly there is a tenable view that no genocide has occurred or is occurring." So, Minister, it appears your government, whether it's told you or not, has already made a determination. And that would explain, I believe, why there is no intention to have an independent assessment of whether a genocide is likely, because the government knows that were they so to do, they would be revealing an unpalatable truth, a truth which would then prevent them from supplying Israel with the weapons that it needs to continue its merciless onslaught. It really is as grubby as that, Minister, isn't it?
Good question.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it is not as grubby as that. Almost every word of that. Well, firstly, clearly there is an ongoing legal case where we are not going to litigate that case in this chamber, as you would expect. A judicial review on the F-35 element is happening over these days. The judge will find on it, and we will respect that judgment. On the question, let me be absolutely clear to the honourable gentleman. We continue to conduct assessments across our full range of responsibilities under international law. It is simply not true to suggest we are avoiding making any internal assessment in order to justify policy. We continue to assess these things carefully. We do it on a rolling basis. We do it regularly. What he has said is simply not true.
Paul Wall.
Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Minister for his personal commitment to this cause, and can I thank the UK Government for putting this on the record at the UN yesterday as a matter of extreme urgency. But can I also put to him directly the challenge from Tom Fletcher yesterday, the UN's aid chief. He said, for those killed and whose voices are silenced, what more evidence do you need now? Will you act decisively to prevent genocide? What's his answer to that question?
I thank my honourable friend who has been committed to these issues ever since he came to this place, and I know before as well. Tom Fletcher's words are important. As I said earlier, he is the most senior member of the humanitarian community in the world. What he said at the meeting that we called yesterday is very, very important. We have not waited for the meeting yesterday. We have not waited for determinations of international courts to take action. Let us not forget what we have done, whether it is in relation to UNRWA, whether it is in relation to the arms suspension, whether it's the sanctions on Israeli settlers, whether it is our convening role in the United Nations Security Council. We will continue to take action. Mr. Fletcher rightly asks for decisive action. Has our action yet been decisive? Clearly, Madam Deputy Speaker, it has not. Hostages remain detained. Palestinians continue to suffer. A two-state solution feels very distant indeed. We have not yet had the decisive effect that we would wish to see, and we will continue to act until we do.
Sir Julian Lewis.
As well as raping, kidnapping and killing civilians on October the 7th for its own sake, Hamas had a strategy of trying to prevent further peace deals between Israel and its Arab neighbours by provoking a massive, frenzied reaction to the atrocities. Does the Minister share my dismay that that brutal strategy seems to be succeeding?
I do share his dismay that events in the region since October the 7th, since the horrific actions of October the 7th, have involved an enormous amount of bloodshed, an enormous amount of civilian suffering. This government hopes that we will yet see a day where there is a stable region with normal diplomatic relations amongst all of its members, with a two-state solution, with two states living securely and safely side by side, and I regret that that feels such a distant prospect.
Nasha. Madam Deputy Speaker. 77 years on since the Nakba, Israel's illegal occupation eats away at the land, and now we have, and let me just repeat the word loud and clear, genocide, plausible genocide, ICJ, plausible genocide, ICC, plausible genocide, Amnesty International, plausible genocide, United Nations. What I want to know is, since this week's news, what I'm asking the Minister is what new assessments have been done and how often are they done to determine what else and what other actions we can do to stop what is happening to the Gazans, to the children, to the civilians, to the aid workers, to make sure that we can get aid in. What other pressures and levers can this government use, not just from our country, but as a bloc with international partners and others, in addition to recognising Palestine? Surely that's long overdue.
Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend asks important questions about assessments. They are made regularly, they're made on a rolling basis, they're made in light of new events. But I want to reassure her that we do not wait for assessments, nor do we wait for final legal determinations before taking action. I've listed some of that action already, and I can reassure her that we will work urgently with our allies and partners on further pressure to make Israel change course.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Even if the Minister can't condemn what is obviously an act of genocide, could he tell us in clear terms, are we still supplying parts to F-35 jets that do find their way to Israel, that do take part in the bombardment of Gaza? And are there still flights going from RAF Akrotiri over to Israel that are carrying military equipment that can be used either to bomb Gaza or to undertake military action against the people of the West Bank?
To be clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, the decisions that we take on arms bind every part of the UK government. We are a government committed to abide by our international legal obligations, and we will continue to do so. Let me be clear again on the position on F-35s. Where F-35 sales were directly to Israel, and whether that is in relation to any particular component, those sales have been suspended. Where the sales are to a global pool, which is necessary for the continued function for the global F-35 programme, that has not been suspended. Where sales go to a global pool, it is clearly possible that they could find final destination in Israel. But to suspend our provision of components to the F-35 global pool would, in effect, be to render the F-35 programme inoperable. And it is on that basis that we set out the decisions that we took in September.
Andrew Pakes.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I first put on record the relief I feel and many others about the release of Eden Alexander, and that I am saying a prayer for the other hostages. Yeah. Every week, though, we come back to this house, the horror is greater. And for many of us this morning, woke up to a spokesperson for the Israeli government on the Today programme denying there is hunger happening in Gaza at all. But this House knows the reality. 10 weeks into a blockade of aid by the Israeli government, with 1 in 5 starving. He will know, Madam Deputy Speaker, you will know and be aware that Tom Fletcher spoke passionately and with purpose yesterday at the UN about the collective failure of the UN to speak out previously. So can I ask the Minister, how do we avoid that this time? What more evidence do we need before we take action? What more action can be done?
Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said earlier, the words of Tom Fletcher in the United Nations Security Council are important, and the IPC assessment that was produced on Monday, this is an assessment which is authoritative and thorough in its production, is the most important indication of needs in Gaza, and it should be taken seriously by everyone in this chamber and indeed by the Israeli government as well. We have, as my honourable friend who has been long committed to these issues, he knows the actions that we have taken so far. I will not speculate from this dispatch box other than to reassure the House that we will be working urgently with our allies and partners in order to ensure that Israel changes course.
Dr. Andrew Morrison.
Madam Deputy Speaker, there can be few now who would believe that the conduct of the Netanyahu government is anything other than gross and disproportionate. But does the Minister agree with me that the actor in the region that is unequivocally embarked on genocide is Hamas, with its self-avowed policy of killing Jews and eradicating the State of Israel?
Hear, hear. Well said, Dr. Andrew.
I have condemned Hamas, their despicable actions, their ugly and unacceptable rhetoric many times within this dispatch box, and I'm happy to do so again. It is the events of October the 7th, in all of their full horror, that triggered this most recent, most horrific round of violence.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So in addition to calling for the release of all hostages, Tom Fletcher, the UN Emergency Release Chief, also asked last night, what action will we tell future generations we each took to stop the 21st century atrocity to which we bear daily witness in Gaza? So what action will the government take if in the next 24 hours Israel doesn't allow aid into Gaza?
Madam Deputy Speaker, as I've said throughout the course of the afternoon, the responsibilities weigh heavily on all of us. We do not view the situation as acceptable, and we will continue to take steps with our allies and partners to urge Israel to change course.
Mark Pritchard.
Madam Deputy Speaker, but as we all meet here in this rather grand palace of Westminster, the reality is on the ground that Palestinian children continue to die in the rubble. And is it not becoming clear that the central policy of the Israeli government seems more about protecting the political skin and life of the current Israeli Prime Minister rather than even saving the lives of the remaining Israeli hostages and the lives of Palestinians? I appeal to the British government to be again on the right side of history, the right side of the law, and the right side of moral judgment, and not to back one particular individual fighting for his political life back in Tel Aviv.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the honourable gentleman speaks powerfully about the various views in Israel, and I won't speculate on the decision-making of others, but I listen very carefully to the words of Israeli hostages themselves when they have been released, what they make of the circumstances in Israel and what policy they think should be adopted. These are important voices and they echo loudly, I know, both in this chamber and across the world. We are clear, whatever the intentions, the international obligations under law on the Israeli government in relation to Gaza are indisputable, and we call today, as we have called every day, for them to abide by them.
John MacDonald.
Can I refer to my register of interest? I'm the Secretary of the National Union of Journalists Parliamentary Group. It's the anniversary of the murder by Israeli forces of Shireen Abu Akleh, the renowned journalist. Alongside her on that day was another journalist, Ali Samoudi. He was shot in the back. 2 weeks ago, the Israeli forces arrested, dragged him from his home, and Ali is now in detention somewhere, we do not know where. Under international law, journalists are afforded special protection. Can I ask the Minister now that we immediately take up with the Israeli government the question of where Ali Samoudi is and to seek everything we can do to secure his release, because all he was trying to do on behalf, and he works for CNN and Reuters and Al Jazeera, he was simply reporting on some of the war crimes that are taking place.
Madam Deputy Speaker, my right honourable friend raises incredibly important points about journalists, and I'm happy to take up the case in question. It is, of course, not just journalists. There are a whole set of people who are afforded special protections under international law: journalists, medical professionals, and indeed aid workers, many of whom that we have seen terrible incidents in Gaza. We have been pressing for accountability and justice on those questions, and I think in particular of the 3 British nationals killed in the World Central Kitchen incident more than a year ago, still waiting for justice.
Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Minister accept that where prima facie evidence of genocide exists, then awaiting the determination formally to be made by a court is not sufficient for us to meet the duty to prevent under the Genocide Convention?
In this case, the International Court of Justice is clearly the correct authority. It has issued a set of provisional measures, and we support those measures.
Cat Smith.
Speaker. What we're seeing in Gaza is civilians starving to death. What we're seeing in Gaza is aid being held for 10 weeks, used as a weapon against innocent civilians. My constituents rightly are outraged by what they're seeing, and so am I. But whilst I welcome the Minister's words, what further actions can the government take to send a clearer message to Israel that this absolutely has to stop? Will the Minister look again at sanctions? Will he look at arms export licences? And will he recognise the state of Palestine?
I know my honourable friend's constituents will be concerned as my constituents in Lincoln are concerned, as I know constituents right across the whole of the country are concerned. I have seen for my own eyes. I went to Al Arish to see British aid languishing while people desperately required it in Gaza. I saw the restrictions that were preventing aid getting in. I can assure her and her constituents that I have raised this personally in every way that I have thought able to try and make progress, and we will continue to do so. It is a source of continued personal frustration to me and frustration to the government that we have not been able to get aid back into Gaza in accordance with international law.
John Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Minister have any information about how much aid is being held in Hamas-controlled warehouses in Gaza? And isn't the key to this desperate situation our links to Tehran? Because at the end of the day, it's the Iranian regime which pulls the strings of its puppet organisation Hamas, which is holding these hostages in conditions which are akin to torture.
So we take serious steps, Madam Deputy Speaker, to ensure that Hamas do not get access to aid. We supported a review into UNRWA's function. Mr. Fletcher set out yesterday in his remarks his view on the robustness of the United Nations provisions in order to try and prevent Hamas from stockpiling aid. And the findings of the IPC report on Monday are sobering reading about the circumstances in which Palestinian civilians are trying to live in Gaza. But I agree with him. Iran's malign role in the region must stop. They have supported Hamas, who have brought nothing but pain and misery, not just to Israelis, but to Palestinians as well.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last week, the Minister said, in response to a question I asked, that forcible movement of the Gazan population out of Gaza would be forcible displacement. Forcible displacement is a war crime, and that is what is already happening and is about to accelerate. So will he say in terms, as the head of UNRWA said this week, as the former Israeli Defence Minister Moshe Yaalon said last week, that Israel is committing war crimes in Gaza?
I will resist. My honourable friend is not just a doughty advocate for the Palestinian people, he's also a very much respected lawyer, so as he would expect, I'm not going to take the opportunity to make a determination at the dispatch box, but I will be clear again that forced displacement is clearly prohibited by international law, and we're clear on that at all times.
Adnan Hussain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Amnesty International has described the 2-month siege in Gaza as genocide in action. Israel is, according to experts, deliberately creating conditions that could lead to the physical destruction of the Palestinian people, a pattern many may argue amounts to genocide. As a signatory to the Genocide Convention, does the Minister agree that the UK has a legal duty to act when there is a risk of genocide? And that duty to prevent begins not when genocide is confirmed, not when genocide is proven, not when genocide is established, but when there is a reasonable suspicion that it is occurring. The alarm bells are flashing red. The warning signs are there for the government to act. Will the government act?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've set out both the process of determination, the provisional measures that have been issued by the ICJ, and the government's determination not to wait until cases are concluded, but to take action now to try and preserve life.
Tahir Ali.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Israel is intentionally starving Palestinians, and action should be taken to stop the war crimes and genocide. These are the words of a leading United Nations
expert on right to food. Will the Minister tell us what is preventing, or what are they scared of, in terms of imposing sanctions on Israel? Because if this dispatch box is not where we can discuss this, certainly we can't discuss this behind closed doors.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think the House has heard me talk about sanctions in the same terms over a long period of time, and I understand the frustration about not being able to speculate from this dispatch box about sanctions we might take. To do so would reduce their effectiveness and would frustrate the will of the House. We do keep all of these matters under close review. We are not scared in the performance of our duties. We are working all of the time, Madam Deputy Speaker, to try and practically change the situation on the ground, and that is to what all our efforts are directed.
Vicky Slade.
Deputy Speaker, barely a day goes by that I don't receive impassioned pleas from my constituents in Mid-Dorset Northpool begging for actions, not words, from this government. And many have shared their distress that we celebrated the defeat of tyranny on VE Day at the same time as the people of Gaza starve and are bombed to oblivion. They say that we are complicit in genocide. What does he say to my constituents? Because I agree with them, but I feel powerless to do any more than come here every time and say the same thing.
Madam Deputy Speaker, deeds not words, restoring funding to UNRWA, suspending arms licences, £129 million in humanitarian assistance to the occupied Palestinian territories, continued work at the UN Security Council, continued work in relation to international courts. And I recognise the frustration of the House, and I do not in any way wish to weigh misery between the many, many, many people still in Gaza or the West Bank facing real hardship at this moment. But the action of this government has made a real difference to Palestinian lives. I have seen it with my own eyes, and there are people who are in safety now because of the UK government. We will continue to do what we can. I accept there is more to do, but our actions do have impact.
Ruth Jones.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for outlining the horrors being inflicted on the people of Gaza so clearly yet again today. But we have heard from the dispatch box the many times in support of the Palestinians before. He talks about court proceedings, but court proceedings take months, if not years, to complete. And men, women and children are dying every hour from hunger, disease and bombs in Gaza at the moment. They cannot wait. What is he doing? We need action, not words.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've outlined some of the action, but I would also like to reassure my honourable friend that we are not waiting for legal determinations, not least because the ICJ has issued provisional measures, but also because it is the policy of this government that we are acting now to try and improve the lot of Palestinians.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. One thing we can all agree on is that we want to see the safe release of the hostages. But with that in mind, it's evident that military action of itself is and was never going to achieve that. And with that in mind, does the government support or condemn Israel for the most recent escalation of military action? And if they're not prepared to condemn them at this stage, how many more innocent deaths must there be before they do?
My honourable friend refers to the hostages. It is some of the released hostages who have made this argument with the greatest force, and they are important words. But let me say concretely and clearly, the British government opposes the return to war in Gaza by the Israeli government. We oppose the most recent escalation.
Maureen de Just.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm sure I'm not the only member in this House who is getting increasingly frustrated by the number of discussions we are having, saying the same things over and over again, whilst the horrific situation for the Palestinian people in Gaza worsens day by day. Does the Minister agree that for us to send a clear message to Israel, we need to do three things? Number one, suspend all arms licenses to Israel, including the F-35 licenses. Number two, impose sanctions against Israel. And number three, recognise the state of Palestine.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the House has heard me speak of my frustration on a number of occasions, and I share it with the honourable member. I think I've addressed the three substantive points he raises already in this session. And I am the Minister. I am the Minister. These responsibilities weigh particularly heavily on me. I am not blind to the IPC. I'm not blind to Tom Fletcher's testimony. At a session we called, do the honourable members think I am unaware of the horrors that are being meted out on people in Gaza? I am not unaware. I am taking every action I can, as are other ministers. It is an intolerable situation, as you heard from the Prime Minister earlier, and we are lifting every effort to trying to change it.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Nobody wants war, but we must reflect that this is a war. It's a war between our ally, Israel, and the aggressor, Hamas. It was Hamas that brutally murdered, mutilated, and raped innocent Israeli citizens. It is Hamas that still keeps 58 hostages under lock and key. And it is Hamas who, in their own charter, have genocidal intent, calling for the wiping out of Israel and the killing of Jews. So will the Minister at least accept that for those that wish to call those trying to defend their own citizens genocidal, that plays into the hands of the terrorists themselves, who will continue to use their own citizens as human shields and give no pathway to peace?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I condemn Hamas and its actions entirely. Israel is an ally, but we say to all of our allies that international humanitarian law is a binding framework for us all. When it is breached in one place, it is a breach that echoes around the world. That is why we have been so clear on these questions throughout.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm sick and tired of coming back to this chamber, asking the same questions, getting the same answers, when war crime after war crime is being committed and when a genocide is taking place. And it's a sick joke to believe that it's right, which it is, to impose sanctions on Russia for its unlawful invasion of Ukraine, yet we're meant to believe that tutting Benjamin Netanyahu and telling everyone that we think this is really bad somehow cuts the mustard. It doesn't. Words aren't enough to stop war crimes. We need more than words. We need more than actions. So can the Minister advise this House how many more Gazans need to be killed by Israel, injured by Israel, starved by Israel, until the government does the right thing and brings widespread sanctions in, like it's done on Russia, because people think we're scared and people think it's double standards?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we have taken action. I've described that action this afternoon. I have already assured the House that it is certainly not fear that shapes our actions. And I'm, of course, always happy to return to this dispatch box to answer questions from parliamentarians about this question. But I would not want to give the House the impression that that is all I do. When I am not in this House, I am working on these tasks with urgency. I've listed some of the actions that we have taken since I've been the Minister. I will continue to work on these questions, and I will continue to return to the House to answer your questions when you have them.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Over the last 18 months, Israel has facilitated 1.7 million tonnes of aid going into Gaza. Very sadly, much of that aid has ended up in warehouses, trucks have been raided by Hamas operatives, and the aid has failed to get into the hands of the people that desperately need it. So now we've got a position whereby the blockade has continued. Will the Minister come up with a credible plan to actually get the aid in, require the IDF to facilitate the aid going to the people that desperately need it, and prevent Hamas and its other terrorists from capturing the aid and preventing the people of Gaza gaining the aid they desperately need?
Well said.
I do condemn where Hamas has interfered with aid deliveries. I condemn it utterly. We have to be clear that considerable amounts of aid were not allowed into Gaza, even before this most recent blockade. And this blockade is now ensuring that nowhere near the scale of aid required is getting in. There are proposals, as I think the honourable member is alluding to, for other methods of getting in. We would support proposals to get aid into Gaza, provided that they are in accordance with humanitarian principles, which are vital in every conflict zone around the world, and that Emergency Relief Coordinator yesterday set out his views about how those principles need to be adhered to.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. UK manufacturers of F-35 components can place GPS markers on every single component. The UK government can ensure that every component that is exported can have a GPS marker on it. So what is the government's excuse for continuing with its programme on F-35s when it can distinguish the destination of every single component?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've set out the position on F-35s. I've set out the manner in which the global spares pool works. That is information provided by the experts who are responsible. I understand that some honourable members may disagree with those facts. The discussion is happening in a judicial review this week, and I'll not get ahead of that process.
Tom Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 1 in 5 are facing starvation. 90% of people are now displaced. Over 50,000 people are dead, and Gaza is the most dangerous place on earth for humanitarian workers. This has to end. But still, the government keep on condemning Netanyahu, but he doesn't listen. The time for words has to stop. We need action. So will the Minister take this time to commit to sanctioning those extremist members of the Israeli cabinet, suspending all arms trades with the Israeli government, and recognising a Palestinian state?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think those 3 points have been put to me already on the over the course of the afternoon, so I won't repeat my answers. I won't speculate on further sanctions, but I would point out he references sanctions on settlers. We have taken far-reaching sanctions on settlers. We continue to impose the violent expansion of settlements in the occupied territories, which are illegal under international law, and we will continue to do so.
Rachel Hopkins.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the Minister for his often candid comments here, but we will continue to come to this chamber and ask those questions when our constituents continue to be horrified, like we are, at the devastation that is playing out in Gaza. The UN has stated that action must be taken now to prevent genocide. So does the Minister understand that our constituents, when they see a legal response, just remain so frustrated they want to see tangible action? Does the Minister understand that?
I do understand the frustration of constituents, as I said earlier, Madam Deputy Speaker. That is a frustration that is very much shared in Lincoln and I know across the country. Everybody in this House, everybody across the country wants to see an end to the awful scenes on our television screens.
Iqbal Mohammed.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister has stated that the legality of UK's F-35 exports is currently being tested in the courts. In the High Court, the government has made submissions that no evidence has been seen that Israel is deliberately targeting civilian women and children. There is also evidence of Israel making efforts to limit incidental harm to civilians. If the government needs to be shown evidence that Israel is deliberately targeting civilians, I suggest the Minister and his colleagues review the footage captured by the BBC of yesterday's bombing of the European Gaza hospital, or the footage emerging from the Nasser hospital, or the millions of hours of live stream footage available since October the 7th, or the thousands of reports and articles published since. The past 18 months has seen a total war of all of Gaza, with acts of ethnic cleansing and extermination according to the UN. Does the UK deny the existence of this evidence, and if so, does the government has the government committed perjury in court?
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's obviously inappropriate to try and rehearse submissions which are currently being heard by the court.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I know that the Minister will know this, so we should put this on the record, that when President Netanyahu says that there is no way he will stop his onslaught in Gaza, he does not do so with the consent of the hostage families or indeed the majority of people in Israel. Even President Trump
is now avoiding him. But my colleague from Vauxhall is right. We have obligations too. And I hear the frustration from the Minister. I think across this House, we want to give him strength so that he can go further. And he will have heard the calls about sanctions, about reports to international criminal courts. Will he give us, as we had in 2014, a vote in this place about immediately recognising Palestine so that we can strengthen his negotiations with Israel to send that clear message that what is happening in Gaza is wrong and must stop?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I know that my honourable friend has a constituent, a incredibly brave and courageous constituent who is herself a member of a hostage family, and her words, whenever I've seen her and those of other hostage families, ring in our ears, as I know they do across the world. They are important views expressed by those most directly affected by the horrors of October the 7th and all that followed. I've rehearsed some of the arguments already in relation to recognition.
Jack Rankin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his clarity that genocide is a legal test, a test whether a crime committed with the intent to destroy a national, ethnic, racial or religious group in whole or in part. Exactly what the Hamas terrorist group states in its foundational charter, the intent to destroy Israel and Jews worldwide, as it actively sought to do on the 7th of October. If it wanted to end the war, Hamas would release 58 hostages it continues to hold. How is the Minister supporting our friend and ally, the democracy Israel, in its fight against this genocidal terrorist group?
I agree with the honourable gentleman about the horrors of what Hamas has done, the ugly and unacceptable rhetoric that they have often employed, not just towards Israelis, but Jews everywhere. And I recognise the anxiety in this country about the rise in anti-Semitic rhetoric ever since October the 7th. We have, as I said earlier, Israel is our ally, and we have stood with her when she faces legitimate security threats. We have always, as a friend, urged her to abide by international humanitarian law. Where there is a risk that she does not, we make it clear, as we've discussed over the course of this afternoon.
Lawrence Turner.
Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to preface the question by saying that no member of this House should doubt the dedication and the compassion which the Minister fulfills his duties. Over the last few days, the World Health Organization has warned that Gazans face intergenerational scarring as a result of hunger in the territory. The WHO quoted figures produced by the Gazan Health Ministry, which held that 55 children have died as a result of malnutrition. What assessments does the UK government make of the extent of malnutrition in Gaza, the number of deaths attributable to starvation as a result of Israel's refusal to allow aid to enter the Strip?
My honourable friend from Birmingham Northfields asked important questions, and he is, I know he follows these issues closely. The most up-to-date and authoritative assessment on these questions is the IPC assessment of Monday. We are considering it in detail. Its findings are appalling. We are not yet able to fully delineate the link between aid restrictions and those findings in the level of detail that he describes, but the connection is obvious.
I'm looking to finish this urgent question around 2 o'clock, so if members could keep their questions and also ministers keep their answers pithy, I'd appreciate it, as would the rest of the House. Andrew George.
Deputy Speaker, I've recently returned from the occupied Palestinian territories with the Honourable Member for Leicester South. We were expecting an appalling situation. It was far worse. Israeli ministers are gleefully calling for the bombing of food warehouses because they believe that that would help bring victory in their eyes. It's quite clear that that Israeli hostages are being used as a pretext to continue the slaughter and the starvation in Gaza at the moment. Although I recognise and the sincere compassion of the Minister in the way that he's expressed and holds himself on this issue, it's quite clear that he comes with a straitjacket around him. And what we need here is the Prime Minister who can make the decisions, because we're not going to get to the point of seeing changes to or any action on arms supplies or on trade or in any other area, or even the recognition of the state of Palestine. But if he can't do that, can he at least recognise the right of Palestinians to statehood?
Order, Minister.
I'm glad that the honourable gentleman was able to travel. I recognise, as I've said before, from this dispatch box, the importance of members from across the House seeing these situations up close and being able to form their own judgments. And I am the relevant minister and I speak with the authority of the government.
Rupert Hook.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister, who's a good man, recognises that the 70-day aid blockade has made starvation widespread in Gaza. And when I was on delegation in the recess with the Honourable Member for Strangford, we were nearby in Egypt, we had real fears that annexation of both Gaza and the West Bank is near inevitable. He's told us what steps he's taken up to now, but there has been a clear escalation. Can he please give us some hope that there are further levers that can be pulled, because we don't want to be on the wrong side of history?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I won't speculate about further actions, but I'd like to recognise, both as I did in the previous intervention, how welcome it is that my honourable friend has travelled to the region. Egypt is an important partner for the UK in relation to these questions. I myself saw the vital role they are playing in supporting healthcare for injured Palestinian children. I saw injured Palestinian children myself in Al Arish Hospital, and I was very pleased while I was there to announce £1 million of UK contribution to ensure that Palestinian civilians displaced into Egypt get the help and healthcare that they need.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
The UN says Israel's denial of aid is evidence of the systematic dismantling of Palestinian life. Therefore, there is a risk that we are witnesses to genocide. His government can reinstate airlifts of aid along the lines of those arranged last year, which would send a very powerful message. Will the Minister act now and enable aid airlifts?
We have supported airlifts in the past, as I'm sure the Honourable Lady knows, and we were very glad to work with our Jordanian partners on that question. I have to be straightforward with the House. Given the scale of need in Gaza, we should not be displaced from the central question, which is ensuring that the road crossings open. That is the only way to get aid at the scale required.
Matt Weston.
Deputy Speaker, it should have been clear at the outset when Yoav Gallant, the former Israeli Defence Minister, said Israel will eliminate everything. 18 months and 52,000 deaths later, Israel Katz, also a Defence Minister in Israel, stated that blocking aid was being used to pressure Hamas, making starvation an openly stated Israeli weapon of war. Elimination, eradication, or genocide. As Tom Fletcher said, can this government now urgently act to prevent it?
My honourable friend asked important questions, and I've been clear from this dispatch box, and I'm clear again, aid must not be used as a pressure tool, it must not be used as political leverage, and it must not be used as a military tactic.
Ayub Khan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've had truly shocking statements in this chamber. The Foreign Minister suggested that not enough Palestinians had been killed in order to constitute a genocide. The Prime Minister stated that although he understood the definition of genocide, he didn't refer to it as a genocide. The Minister repeats that this is a matter for international courts. If that is the case, why are the government lawyers making submissions, advancing submissions, that no genocide has been conducted when it comes to the sale of the F-35 parts?
Madam Deputy Speaker, as I've said, I'm not going to try and litigate the submissions of the court case on the questions that we have described. I have addressed the issues repeatedly in this House. I have always been clear that we would defend that case, and that is what we're doing, and we will all see the judgment of the judges.
Sonia Kumar.
Thank Madam Deputy Speaker. Currently, 4,000 newborns in Gaza are unable to access essential life-saving care due to the destruction of medical facilities. Severe malnutrition and death of critically ill children is now a daily reality. In light of the ongoing suffering of children, does the Minister agree that it's time for the UK to go further in its actions and find alternative ways to getting critical medicines into Gaza and protect those vulnerable children and ensure humanitarian access to Gaza? And will he consider alternative routes for those children who are desperately needing critical care?
Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend from Dudley is very committed to these questions. I responded to an earlier question emphasising the central importance of road routes ensuring aid of the scale required. But I want to assure the House that, of course, we continue to look at what alternatives we can find to help where we can. That has included supporting a small number of Gazan children to get access to specialist healthcare here in the UK, which they are currently accessing. Where we can help, we will help, but I must be honest with the House about the scale of aid required if the IPC findings of Monday are to be averted.
Adam.
Thank you. Madam Deputy Speaker, 3 weeks ago, whilst I was in the West Bank, I spoke to a young Palestinian refugee mother with tears in her eyes, asked me, why has the world forgotten us? My response then has been echoed today. We, as the world, haven't forgotten them, but what we have done is failed them completely. And the failure looks like this. United Nations has now confirmed that every single day, over 100 children have been killed or injured since March. Imagine that as our children. So can I ask the Minister, if God forbid, if 100 European children were being killed every single day, or God forbid, 100 Israeli children were being killed every single day, would we be supplying even a penknife to the perpetrators of this crime, yes or no?
Madam Deputy Speaker, the death of any child is a tragedy. I have set out already the steps that we have taken in relation to arms suspension, and I would like to reassure those watching not from the UK, as I reassured Jordanian MPs who I saw this morning, nobody has forgotten about Gaza, not in this House, not in this country. It will continue to be an issue of the first-rank importance for this government, and I will continue to work every day to try and see the changes we've described this afternoon.
Ian Byrne.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Minister, you've touched on the UK government supplying the global pool on the supply of F-35 jets for international security and peace. Considering we are seeing the live streaming with genocide against the Palestinian people, and F-35s are a crucial part of that, being used to bomb civilian camps and hospitals, can I ask if the government are actually considering whether Israel, with its actions, should be part of that global pool?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't wish to seem evasive, but when these questions are being determined in the court this week, I don't want to get ahead of those submissions and those discussions.
Shannon.
Deputy Speaker, I think some thanks should be given to the Minister for his temperament, his words well chosen, and his reaction to all of the questions. And he showed incredible patience, and I think we all admire him for that. Undoubtedly, there are innocent people who are suffering and have been suffering since the Hamas genocidal attacks on the 7th of October took place. The suffering of Israeli and Palestinian children mean that we must find a way forward to secure peace. So how does the Minister believe we can further push for the aim of peace and to put the welfare of the children, the innocents in this region, as a priority?
The Honourable Member for Strangford is unfailing in his courtesy, and I'm grateful for it again this afternoon. He asks the vital, the central question: how can we return to a diplomatic process that can provide for security and stability in the region? It must be, in accordance with the Arab Reconstruction Plan, no place for Hamas in the future, an immediate release of hostages, an immediate return of aid, and a return to a diplomatic process that can provide for security and stability for two states side by side.
Joanna Baxter.
Madam Deputy Speaker, my constituents in Paisley and Renfrewshire South write to me on an almost daily basis, horrified at the humanitarian catastrophe unfolding before our very eyes. The denial of aid to innocent Palestinians is not only intolerable, it's unconscionable. My honourable friend was right earlier when he talked about deeds not words. So can I ask the Minister, what does further pressure on Israel look like, and what practical measures will our government take to prevent genocide in line with our international legal obligations? Hear, hear.
I can reassure my honourable friend and her constituents in Paisley that we discuss these matters urgently with our friends and allies, and that we will always abide by our international legal obligations, including those she mentions.
Paula Barker. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given the genocide that we are witnessing unfold before our eyes every single day, will the government drop the 2030 roadmap for UK-Israel bilateral relations and impose economic and diplomatic sanctions in order to apply pressure on Israel to abide by its obligations under international law?
I thank my honourable friend from Liverpool Riverside for her continued engagement in these questions. I'm afraid, Madam Deputy Speaker, as you would expect, I won't be speculating on further sanctions from this dispatch box this afternoon.
John Slinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I acknowledge the dedication of my honourable friend and British diplomats in this regard, but my constituents are deeply concerned. Does he agree that the Israeli Security Cabinet's recent plans are completely unacceptable? Its aid blockade is also totally unconscionable, and we must make plain to this Israeli government that we and the international community will not tolerate this, and as in other theatres of conflict, we will consider all practical steps, including military aid drops, to get aid through to those who need it.
I thank my honourable friend from Rugby, and I recognise the concern that his constituents would be feeling. I can reassure him that we are considering all measures to try and ensure that aid gets into Gaza. I regret that there is no alternative to road access given the scale of aid required, but we will continue to work on these questions with the urgency that he describes, and I'm grateful for his words about British diplomats, and I can reassure the House that it is not just the ministerial team, it is the diplomatic service of the United Kingdom that works on these questions each day, including in the Security Council yesterday afternoon.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 10 long weeks since the Israeli blockade has brought famine to the region, while food is rotting across the border, while the Israeli government are lying and denying the scale of the atrocities, with the Defence Minister Israel Katz quoting, "The blockade is a main pressure lever to secure victory." Minister, as a member of the UN Security Council, when will this government impose meaningful sanctions to stop the genocide that we see happening?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we've covered sanctions and determinations, but I want to reassure my honourable friend that we consider our position on the UN Security Council as an important responsibility, and that is why we called the meeting yesterday in the Council that has led to so much of the discussion this afternoon.
Emily Darlington.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When we look at those scenes, for many of our constituents, they're looking for their family members in those pictures. One such member is Dr. Roddy, who's stuck in North Gaza, very ill and frail, and his son and daughter-in-law are important NHS doctors in my constituency. What are we doing to make sure that those people that need care, that are stuck in Gaza, have a way to come out and be cared for their family members here?
Where British nationals or their dependents are in Gaza and in danger, it is a top priority for me and my officials to ensure that they are able to leave safely. I don't wish to comment on the specifics, but I'm very happy to take up the specific case both with my honourable friend who's asked it and any other member in a similar circumstance.
Tony Vaughan.
Deputy Speaker, and I too thank the Minister for all his work on this issue. Given the UK's commitment to a two-state solution and given our obligations under international law, can the Minister explain how the government justifies engaging in trade negotiations with Israel while the UN is warning us about genocide in Gaza? And would the Minister agree that pursuing a trade deal in these circumstances would undermine our ability to broker a two-state solution, would also undermine our positive obligations to act to prevent violations of international law?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I can assure the House that my focus is on the matters we have discussed this afternoon. They are urgent and immediate and crowd out all other priorities.
Brian Leishman.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the truth is that there is no need for any organisation to tell the public that what is happening is genocide. After all, we have seen the attempted extermination of the Palestinian people televised live for over a year now. I put it to the Minister that this government will be remembered as complicit in and accomplices to the war crimes being committed by Israel. What actually has to happen for our government to take meaningful action in the name of humanity and decency?
Madam Deputy Speaker, in the time that I have been a minister, on the very first day I was a minister, we restored funding to UNRWA. Within weeks, we had taken the far-reaching actions that I have described in relation to arms sales. I understand the force of the question, and I understand the feeling of our constituents right across the country, in Lincoln and elsewhere. But let us not pretend that this government has taken the same steps that those opposite us did. We took a series of steps, we took them quickly, and we took them decisively. I do not say to the honourable member that what we have done is enough. Nobody could hear this discussion and think it is enough. Nobody could be listening to the UN Security Council yesterday afternoon and think it is enough. But it is different to say there is more to be done than it is to say that nothing has been done.
Laura Kirk-Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. After 70 days of aid being blockaded, we are watching an entirely preventable famine unfolding in real time in Gaza. Meanwhile, the Israeli government's NGO bill seeks to restrict the ability of life-saving humanitarians to operate and instead militarise aid delivery in violation of international humanitarian law. I thank the Minister for all his efforts and for his challenge of this point, but will he continue to challenge the Israeli government on this? And does he agree there has to be accountability?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm familiar with the draft legislation in the Knesset, and we're engaging on the questions that it raises.
Polly Billington.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for all of his work. It sometimes must feel indeed very lonely on that front bench. And we also particularly welcome the urgent session that we managed to secure at the United Nations. But things have got more difficult in the most recent days, and we must ask the question, are we doing enough with our allies on a number of fronts, particularly recognition, where a private letter has gone from many of my colleagues here, dozens of colleagues on this side of the House, and there is unity across the House for recognition of the state of Palestine. Action on sanctions for Ben Gvir and Smotrich, also on the violent settlements, and above all, can we please rule out a trade deal?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I am grateful, genuinely grateful to all those across the House who ask questions, seek me out across the Palace to raise the force of their views on this. And I have seen the letter to which my honourable friend refers. I recognise that I will return to this House on a practically daily basis, given the strength of feeling across the House. And we will continue to work on the questions that she outlines. I won't rehearse answers on the substantive policy questions that she raises, but I would assure her that I will continue to engage right across both my benches and others on the very important questions that are raised.
That concludes the urgent question. We now move on to the next urgent question. I'll give the House a few moments to settle. Urgent question, Kirsty Blackman.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to ask the Leader of the House if she will make a statement on government compliance with the general principles set out in paragraph 9.1 of the Ministerial Code.
House.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Ministerial Code is clear. When Parliament is in session, the most important announcements of government policy should be made in the first instance to Parliament. This is an important principle by which this government stands. Already this session, there have been 146 oral statements in just 133 sitting days, more than one per day, and more than the previous government made in the entirety of their last session. This has included 6 important statements from the Prime Minister, more than 20 from the Foreign Office, and on very important issues like today's statement on infected blood. I and the Government take our obligations to Parliament very seriously, and the Prime Minister and I remind Cabinet colleagues of this regularly. There are also other ways the Government keeps the House updated, including through written ministerial statements, of which there have been 633 so far this session, responses and appearances at select committees, and thousands of responses to parliamentary questions. And while the Government remains committed to making the most important announcements on the floor of the House, we do need to balance this with other demands on the House's time, particularly where there is great interest in the other business of the day. On occasion, Madam Deputy Speaker, developments and announcements will happen when the House is not sitting or emerge later in the sitting day. That's why it's not always possible to make every announcement to the House first. But it's also important that members have sufficient time to read and digest any relevant documents and get advance notice to be able to effectively question a minister and seek any answers. However, Madam Deputy Speaker, as you know, I take this aspect of the ministerial code incredibly seriously, and I will continue to work with Mr Speaker and colleagues across the House to ensure that Parliament is respected, members are informed, the Government is effectively scrutinised, and announcements are made to this House first.
Kirsty Blackman.
Madam Deputy Speaker, over recent times we've seen an increasing trend of government failing to make statements to the House first, despite there being no barrier to them doing so. Thursday last week was a mess, with the Minister of State for Business and Trade trying to withdraw the statement on the UK-US trade agreement, despite members waiting in here for 7 hours for the statement to materialise. The decision to abolish NHS England was relayed to the House on the 13th of March, having been trailed in the media beforehand. On Wednesday, the 12th of March, an urgent question was granted regarding an announcement that had been made the day before on the Sustainable Farming Initiative being cancelled. On March the 6th, a consultation on North Sea energy that had been announced to the media the day before was relayed to the House in a statement. In February, the Government changed refugee citizenship rules and still hasn't informed the House. Madam Deputy Speaker, on Monday this week, the Prime Minister announced the contents of the Immigration White Paper via a speech which mirrored Enoch Powell, despite Parliament sitting later that day. This is a consistent pattern of behaviour by the UK Government. I'm concerned, Madam Deputy Speaker, that there is little point in having a ministerial code if the Government can ignore one of the key principles with no sanction and apparently no consequences. The Government are nearly a year into their term, and so disorganisation or a lack of familiarity with the rules can surely no longer be cited as reasons for consistent breaches of the code. Madam Deputy Speaker, I believe the UK Government should adhere to the principles set out in the ministerial code, and that the Leader of the House must urgently set out how she intends to improve the situation and ensure adherence happens.
Well, can I thank her for raising this urgent question, and I welcome the opportunity to emphasise the importance that I do take these matters with. We have made a number of very big announcements to the House, often responding to world events in real times. I also recognise, and I hope she will respect this, that there are judgments to be made and there is a balance to be struck at times, and I do this with the best interests of the House in mind. There have been many times, she hasn't mentioned those, in this parliamentary session where statements have been made to this House long before the media or anybody else was aware of them. For example, on prison capacity, the increase of defence spending to 2.5%, the response to the Parliamentary Ombudsman's report into the women's state pension age, and many others. And actually, Madam Deputy Speaker, on many of those occasions, the criticism that I received was that members didn't have enough time to properly consider the details of those before having the opportunity to question the Minister. On the immigration white paper, I would just say, with that in mind, hard copies of the white paper, which is a very lengthy, detailed document, were made available in the table office at 9:30 that morning to allow members ample time to read and consider that before questioning the Home Secretary on the floor of the House in a session that lasted 1 hour and 25 minutes. She raises the US trade deal as well last Thursday. And look, I think we can all recognise that that didn't happen exactly as we would have liked it, because international events are often outside of our control, and on this occasion and on other occasions those international events don't take account of UK parliamentary sitting hours and our sort of timing. The Trade Minister made an oral statement to the House as soon as he was able to do so, and I was trying to get the balance right there between that statement being made when the maximum number of members were here versus a statement then not being made for several days otherwise, because it was a Thursday as the House was rising. So we are doing a lot. We are getting on with delivering a huge amount of issues and policies. These trade deals, which are unprecedented in relation to other countries, the US trade deal delivering lower tariffs for steel and car manufacturing, absolutely critical. The India trade deal delivering for Scottish distilleries and for Scotland as well. In trying to do everything all the time, we are trying to get that balance right, but I do want to just emphasise my commitment to making sure that when announcements can be made to this House first, they absolutely are.
Shadow Leader of the House.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for Aberdeen North for raising this urgent question. As she has highlighted, there is a consistent pattern of failure to report first to this House as required in the Ministerial Code. She has rightly drawn attention to the farcical scenes that we had in relation to the Trade Minister required to deliver a statement, then having to be UQ'd the following Monday and trying to give the same statement without any recognition and being rebuked by the Speaker for not knowing the difference. We had, of course, back in October, the embarrassing sight for the government of the Chancellor announcing intended changes to the government's fiscal rules to the media before informing Parliament and having to be publicly rebuked by Mr. Speaker for doing so. Since then, she's mentioned a number of cases. I would highlight the Secretary of State Education announcing tuition fees to the press before Parliament in November, Deputy Prime Minister announcing planning reforms before the final MPPF update was publicly available, an MOD leak on the Global Combat Air Programme in December. Now, as we all know, the Ministerial Code, which the government took great credit for seeking to strengthen on its arrival, makes very plain what the rule is. It doesn't say judgments are to be made. It says the first announcement must be made to Parliament or when the most important announcements of government policy are made. And it doesn't say, by the way, you can prioritise these things. Does anyone seriously think that an announcement on trade wouldn't be of the first importance to this House, or on planning, or on tuition fees, or on the Global Combat Air Programme? No, of course, every single one of those would be vital. But it's not just a matter of ministerial code and ministerial accountability. These decisions are made in breach of the Nolan principles of openness and the requirement for accountability. And of course they're made in breach of Labour's own manifesto to restore confidence in government and ensure ministers are held to the highest standards. So the question, if I may say so, is this: will the Honourable Lady, Right Honourable Lady, encourage the independent adviser to make an inquiry? Will she look to the Cabinet Secretary to do the same with civil servants? And will she and you, Madam Deputy Speaker, look to the Speaker for adequate enforcement of the present rules, which are being widely flouted?
Well, I would gently remind the honourable gentleman that the Ministerial Code does say when the House is in session, announcements will be made to this House first. And I will also remind him that those announcements can be made via written ministerial statements and other things as well. And that is the balance to be struck. And we try to do that in the best interest of the House. But I'm sorry, Madam Deputy Speaker. And, you know, he describes this as business question bingo, but I'm going to give him a bingo because I'm really not going to take a lecture from the honourable gentleman on these matters. This government has done twice as many
oral statements in the same number of sitting days as his government did. We are ensuring there is proper time to scrutinise government bills, something that they didn't do. We are answering significantly more written parliamentary questions than his government ever did. And his government, I have to remind the House at this stage, illegally prorogued Parliament when they couldn't get their own way, something that he went out and defended to his constituents. They had a Prime Minister who was found guilty of misleading this House, something he also defended. And when an MP broke the standards rules, they tried to change them. They had to be dragged here time and time again. This government respects Parliament. We stand up for the rights of Parliament. His government absolutely traduced them.
Richard Baker.
Will the Minister agree there's a certain irony in the SNP raising this matter, given the regularity to which SNP ministers trailed government announcements in the press before coming to a chamber in Hollywood, certainly when I served as a member of the Scottish Parliament. But of course, it is also vital that important announcements should be made in this House first on these key areas of policy. So has it not been the right thing to do for this government to come forward with so many oral statements to this chamber on these key areas of policy, including, of course, most recently on the vital trade deal we've secured with India, which is of such importance to the Scottish economy and our Scottish industry?
Well, he makes a really good point. The trade deal with India was absolutely really good for the Scottish distillery. I think it's going to bring in over £1 billion of additional trade for the Scottish whisky trade sector. And I wasn't aware, actually, of his experience in the Scottish Parliament, but he's made a very good point about making that today.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Marie Goldman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Lady for bringing this urgent question today. All of us in this chamber were elected to represent our constituents and to put the interests of the country first. And in order to do that, we must be able to scrutinise the government's plans and the government's policies. And the best way to do that is in this chamber and as soon as possible. So we are disappointed that the government has chosen to make announcements in this way, and we also know that it isn't the first time. Now, the shadow leader has mentioned various examples of this. I'd like to add some more. Take the NHS, for example, where the government has made key decisions without any statement in the chamber. Decisions like dropping cross-party talks on social care, cutting integrated care board budgets by 50% and scrapping nearly half of NHS targets. So the question has to be, why is the government so worried about bringing these issues to the floor first?
Mr. Leader of the House.
Well, can I thank you for that question? I have to disagree with her analysis there. The Secretary of State for Health and his department, they have made 8 oral statements to this House so far this session, of which nearly all of which have been taken by the Secretary of State for Health himself, and they've lasted a long time as well. His department have been answering many written parliamentary questions, laying down WMSs and also appearing before select committees. The Prime Minister himself has made 6 oral statements to this House and has appeared before the Liaison Committee twice already in this session, far outstripping that of his predecessors. So we are accountable. Of course, we can always do better and improve, and that is what we seek to do. But because we are so busy as a government getting on delivering the change that people have voted for, we are doing our best to inform the House of it.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. At points over the last few years, SNP leadership in Scotland at the most senior levels have been under police investigation, all while their government is failing. Ayrshire ferries that should have cost £80 million, costing £500 million and years late. 1 in 6 Scots on waiting lists. The shambolic creation of Social Security Scotland costing double at £700 million. With this constant waste of taxpayers' money, does she agree with me the SNP should not be looked to as the model of good government?
Well, he makes a very important point that we all should hold ourselves to high standards of accountability and transparency, and that perhaps the Scottish Nationalist Party should do that in the Scottish Government as well.
The Right Honourable Lady is an attentive leader of the House, and I hope that the government shows the same degree of loyalty to her after a tough couple of weeks as she is showing to them.
Yes.
But whilst I acknowledge that the government does make many statements to the House, the point is that all too often it makes them to the media first. And this was noted by you, Madam Deputy Speaker, in your announcement on Monday when you said Mr. Speaker does not understand why the government persists in making announcements in this way when the ministerial code is absolutely clear. So will she take the message back, even if she can't confess it on the floor of the House, that they're going too far and they need to stop?
Leader of the House.
Well, can I first of all thank the honourable gentleman for his very kind remarks, and he's a very attentive member when it comes to raising matters with me and business questions where the government is falling short of its commitment to transparency and openness, whether that's written ministerial questions or correspondence and so on, which I do follow up for him. As I said in my opening remarks, we do endeavour to make these important announcements to the House first, when the House is in session. Obviously, he will appreciate that at times those announcements are made when the House isn't in session, or because we want to give members ample time to fully consider the detailed documentation sitting alongside them. But I can reassure him that this is something I speak to my Cabinet colleagues about very regularly, as does the Prime Minister, and I speak to Mr. Speaker about as well. And we will continue to raise our game to ensure that big, important statements are brought to the House.
Alex Barros-Curtis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And further to the detail that the Leader has set out in her response to the urgent question, I wonder if she can say a little bit more about the modernisation agenda that she is championing. I refer, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the fact I am a member of the Modernisation Committee, so ably chaired by the Leader. And does she agree with me that this agenda is something that all members of this House and all sides of the House should take seriously so that we can faithfully and to the fullest of our ability serve the constituents that we are here to serve?
Well, can I thank him for raising that? As he knows, as a member of the Modernisation Committee, I am determined to ensure that this House of Commons and Parliament becomes and remains the crucible of national debate. Once again, if indeed it ever was that enough, and that is one of the agendas that we are delivering. I want to make sure that all members from across the House, particularly actually the smaller parties who in our new multi-party House of Commons perhaps don't have the access that others do, have ample opportunity to really scrutinise government legislation and make the most of this House of Commons. And I want to proceed on the basis of cross-party agreement so that every member of this House feels they are able to scrutinise and hold to account the government of the day.
Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for securing this urgent question. Of course, it's not the first time she's had to raise this issue in her parliamentary career, but it does appear that whoever is on those benches forgets conveniently everything that they said when they were on these benches. And the Leader will recall a former Labour shadow Leader of the House warning the then Tory government that, I quote, "Parliament must be told first we are not irrelevant." And that warning is as true for this Labour government as it was for the previous Tory administration. So what are we witnessing, Minister? Is this a case of acute amnesia, or is it simply a belief that it is now their turn to treat members of this House with contempt?
Well, I disagree with his analysis there. As I have made absolutely clear, this government has made 145 statements in 133 sitting days. That's more than one a day. The vast majority of those oral statements have been made by Secretaries of State, something we did not see under the previous government. Indeed, for many, many, many months, I and others were calling for the then Foreign Secretary to come and answer questions to this House, something that the previous government blocked from happening because he was in the other place. Absolutely. We have laid 633 written statements and answered thousands more parliamentary questions in this session. I take very seriously our duty to lay ourselves open for transparency, scrutiny and openness with this House, and will continue to strive for ever increasing respect and standards in that regard.
Graham Downey.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I should begin by saying, as the Member of Parliament for Dunfermline Dollar, I've had a front row seat of the SNP's commitment to transparency. After all, it was where the infamous camper van was found. Does the Leader of the House agree with me that, having heard more from the SNP from their position on transparency and openness, does she agree with me it's actually scandalous to bring this up today, that their telling of transparency was when it took freedom of information requests to find out more information of when the former First Minister met with the President of Turkey to discuss, amongst other issues, Scottish trade?
Leader of the House.
Well, I think the Honourable Gentleman makes a very good point, and I don't need to add to it.
That's fine then, that's okay.
Sir Jeremy Wright.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think it would be fair to say that this is not the first government to have disregarded this particular provision of the Ministerial Code. But, can I put this to the Leader of the House? If the charge is that the government, for its own calculated and tactical advantage, has breached the Ministerial Code by announcing something outside this chamber, surely the person determining whether that breach has occurred cannot be the leader of that government. So isn't it time to look again at the recommendations made by, among others, the Committee on Standards in Public Life, of which I was once a member, that the decision maker as to whether the Ministerial Code is breached should be the independent advisor on ministerial interests and not the Prime Minister?
Leader of the House.
Well, he will know that the independent advisor on the Ministerial Code appointed by the previous government was reappointed by this government, and their powers strengthened so that they can initiate inquiries. Those inquiries don't now need to be initiated by the Prime Minister. We are raising standards when it comes to members of Parliament, when it comes to ministers as well. We are holding ourselves accountable to those much higher standards than actually happened under the previous government. And I would just like to reiterate for the House that the Ministerial Code does say when Parliament is in session, the most important announcements of government policy should be made in the first instance to Parliament. So there are times when Parliament is not in session, and those announcements then are brought to the House at other times.
John Davies.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as a new member of this House, I've noticed that on average, almost every single day that this Parliament sits, there is a statement from the government alongside, of course, and quite rightly, urgent questions too. Will the Leader of the House use the Modernisation Committee to look at further ways in which we can scrutinise the work of the government, but without slowing down the delivery of government, which is what we need to do to rebuild Britain?
Leader of the House.
Well, he makes a good point about the balance of business in the day. We are bringing forward a number of key pieces of legislation. I know members from across the House want ample time to scrutinise that legislation, and obviously statements and urgent questions granted on that day can often eat into that time as well, and that's the balance that needs to be struck. The Modernisation Committee is actually looking at these issues at the moment, how we can make the best use of parliamentary time to ensure that the government is adequately scrutinised and accountable, and that backbenchers really have the chance to do that every day of the week.
Dr Luke Evans.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I was here on Thursday as I was actually the responding Shadow Minister for Health on our debate on brain tumours, which was actually pulled forward because of the delay in the statement when it came to the US trade deal. We were waiting for almost an hour for that gap. Could you confirm that there was no pressure from the Prime Minister or indeed Donald Trump to make sure that announcement was made? Because she's repeatedly said that it's when the House isn't sitting. The House was sitting all day on Thursday. In fact, many members had to change their travel plans or change the way in which their meetings were happening to respond to the debates because it was changed, purely for a press conference to happen first before it came to this chamber. So could she rule out there was pressure from the Prime Minister or Donald Trump on this occasion?
Leader of the House.
Absolutely can rule that out. Look, as I said earlier, the emerging agreement on a very important US trade deal, UK-US trade deal, was emerging, has been very fast moving. Those things were changing, even indeed throughout that day in terms of the timing. The announcement itself, the agreement itself was not actually agreed until the announcement itself was made, and we were trying to balance that throughout the day, which is why it was made clear to the House earlier in the day that there would be a statement once that was able to happen, and the Trade Minister came to this House as soon as possible. And I was actually, we were mindful of the fact that in the debate that he was talking about on the backbench business debate on brain tumours, there were many people in the gallery for that debate as well. We were trying to not disrupt the business of the House that day. But sometimes these big global events happen, and the people in charge of those big global events are not actually considering the sitting hours or the well-being of members of Parliament in this House at the time. It was not at the Prime Minister's timing either in that sense.
Jim Allister.
Is the Ministerial Code binding, or is it optional, or is it merely aspirational? And judging by the blatant disregard of what the code says in respect of making statements, can the House have confidence that ministers adhere diligently to the other requirements under the code?
Leader of the House.
The Ministerial Code is a code by which ministers are subject to, and that Ministerial Code is both something that the Prime Minister judges ministers by, but also, as I've said earlier, the independent advisor on the Ministerial Code now has new powers given to him by this Prime Minister to instigate their own inquiries on the Ministerial Code. And I would just again reiterate what the Ministerial Code says in this regard, that when Parliament is in session, the most important announcement of government policy should be made in the first instance to Parliament. And there are many ways in which that can be done other than just through oral statements on the floor of the House.
Harriet Cross.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In early November, the Secretary of State for Education was asked in this chamber by Mr Speaker to start a leak inquiry to find out how the announcement about the tuition fees were going to be raised was first released to the press rather than in this House. That was November, and we're now in mid-May. So can the Leader of the House please update us as to when this inquiry will report, and if the report has actually begun?
Leader of the House.
Well, the Secretary of State for Education made absolutely clear, I think, to the floor of this House then and on subsequent occasion, her fury that announcement, some elements of that announcement were leaked moments before she stood at the dispatch box for a very important announcement to this House, which had been hitherto kept completely under wraps, and no one had sight of it, and that happened moments before she came to this House. And I know she has spoken to Mr Speaker about that subsequently, and I will ensure that any findings of that investigation are reported to her.
Dave Dugan.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we've seen the contempt that the government holds WASPy women, pensioners and the disabled in, the contempt that they hold Scotland's energy sector, job creators and the hospice sector in. But these are all functions of policy. These are discretional and therefore, for better or worse, usually worse, legitimate. It is not discretional to adhere to the Ministerial Code. And it is frankly, if I could be honest, a little beneath the Leader of the House to say that, well, we don't announce it to Parliament first every time, but we do some of the time. And sometimes the House isn't sitting, despite every example being presented today to her was when the House was sitting. So when will she relay to the government, to the Prime Minister, the severe annoyance of members of this House at the repeated inaction of the government on this? And can I advise her, for her own information, that contrary to the 3 Scottish Cross sitting on a wall behind her, there is no such duty on Scottish Government ministers as that which is set out in 9.1 of the Ministerial Code.
Leader of the House.
As I've made clear, we take the ministerial code incredibly seriously. We take respecting this House and Parliament incredibly seriously. We have driven up standards in this regard, standards that were, as I've already said, woefully not upheld by the previous government, who disregarded Parliament time after time. Can that improve? Can we do better? Of course we can, and we do our very best to do that. And I will also just remind this House, there have been many statements to this House, brought to this House first, when, as I say, actually the criticism I got then from many colleagues was that they weren't able to properly consider those issues before then questioning the Minister. And so that is something we also need to get right in that context. But we are doing our very best, and we will continue to strive up standards.
Final question, Iqbal Mohammed.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank my honourable friend for this urgent question. The people of Britain have lost faith in politics and politicians, and it's really important that what we do in this place, since the new Labour government came to power and from this day forward, aims to rebuild that trust. And the question I have to the Minister is, what reassurance will she give to me, the members of this House, and our electorate, that the government will not deliberately or knowingly breach the ministerial code going forward?
Leader.
Well, as I have said, I am committed and determined that this House of Commons remains and becomes and continues to be the crucible of national debate, showing itself to be operating at the highest standards with the best behaviour and culture. We've been looking at some of those issues in the Modernisation Committee, ensuring that independent members like himself and smaller parties have their voice in this House. I think this House has shown itself at times to be all of those things. I've taken steps to raise standards by also taking action on MP second jobs, for example, taking action to ensure that those who misbehave are not on the estate and that action is taken against them as well. I will continue to do that. I hope that he and other smaller parties and other parties across this House will join us in taking those steps to ensure that we have the best behaviour, the highest standards, but also that this House is able to hold the government to account and be the crucible of national debate that we all want it to be.
That concludes the urgent question, and we will now move on to the statement. I'll give the House a few moments to settle. Statement, Nick Thomas-Symonds, Paymaster General.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I am grateful for the opportunity to update the House on the Government's work to respond to the recommendations made in the Infected Blood Inquiry's report of the 20th of May 2024. On that day, the then Prime Minister issued an apology on behalf of the State for the devastating impact that the use of infected blood and infected blood products has had on countless lives, an apology that was echoed by the current Prime Minister, then on the opposition front bench. I once again reiterate that apology wholeheartedly today. No member in this House will be in any doubt of the harm resulting from the infected blood scandal. And the Government is firm that we must listen to the infected blood community and the inquiry and make tangible changes to the way our institutions conduct themselves. However, as the inquiry's report made clear, an apology is only meaningful if it is accompanied by action. And I am here today to set out the actions we are taking to respond to the inquiry's recommendations. Madam Deputy Speaker, I would also like to acknowledge that last week the inquiry held further hearings about the timeliness and adequacy of the Government's response on compensation. I attended to give evidence, along with members of the community who've been impacted by this scandal. And I encourage all members
to listen to the incredibly moving testimony of those impacted. The inquiry has set out their intention to publish a further report, and the Government remains committed to cooperating with the inquiry and acting on its recommendations. On the 17th of December 2024, the Government published its initial response to the inquiry's recommendations. I laid an accompanying written statement where I committed to come before the House with a comprehensive update on our response to each of the inquiry's recommendations within a year of the inquiry's report. This statement fulfils that commitment, and I am grateful for the engagement of all members across the House. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to discuss progress today. I would like to again thank Sir Brian Langstaff and his team. The recommendations he made are wide-ranging, well-considered and necessarily detailed. The Government has worked closely with the devolved governments to make progress implementing those recommendations, which we hope will lead to meaningful change. And I'm grateful to ministerial colleagues for their cooperation, in particular my honourable friend in the Department for Health and Social Care, the Parliamentary Under-Secretary for Public Health and Prevention, for her leadership on the recommendations for which her department is responsible. I'd also like to thank health ministers in the devolved governments, the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health, Jenny Minto in Scotland, Jeremy Miles in Wales, the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care, and the Minister of Health, Mike Nesbitt in Northern Ireland. Their engagement has been invaluable in ensuring we have as unified an approach as possible across the United Kingdom. The Government will continue to engage closely with devolved governments on issues such as support for advocacy charities and implementation in relation to the NHS. I recognise that for many in the community, the Government's actions are coming after decades have passed, and there is nothing that can put right the damage that inaction by multiple previous governments has done, and it's not my intention for this statement to diminish that. My priority now is focusing on delivering meaningful change to ensure that scandals such as infected blood and so many others cannot happen again. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I turn now to the recommendations themselves. Alongside this statement, I have published an accompanying paper on gov.uk setting out in detail the Government's response to each of the recommendations, and I will place a copy in the libraries of the House. Equally, I am firm on the importance of these recommendations to the infected blood inquiry, and I am writing today to community representatives to inform them of the publication of the Government's response. The UK and devolved governments have accepted the inquiry's recommendations in full or in principle, and implementation is underway across government, arm's-length bodies and healthcare settings. Where recommendations are accepted in principle, we've sought to explain the rationale for doing so, balancing agreement of the spirit of the recommendations with their implementation, and some are subject to future DHSC spending decisions. I have noted some of the recommendations that have drawn quite rightly attention from across the House in previous debates, so I will just take a moment to touch on those. Firstly, on compensation, and I'm grateful to those who've attended previous debates on this in the House, and indeed many are here today. The Infected Blood Compensation Authority, or IBCA, delivered on the Government's commitment to provide the first full compensation payments by the end of last year. IBCA publishes its data regarding compensation on a monthly basis, and as of the 6th of May, payments totalling over 96 million have been made. IBCA is continuing to scale up its operations to deliver compensation as quickly as possible, and has confirmed plans to contact an average of 100 people every week to begin their claims. I'm also pleased to announce today that the interim chair, Sir Robert Francis, who developed vital work to inform the design of the compensation scheme and has overseen delivery of the scheme to this point, will continue in that role of interim chair for a further 18 months. Another recommendation that has been of particular interest to honourable and right honourable members is recommendation 10 regarding funding for charities providing patient advocacy services. And I'm pleased that last week my honourable friend wrote to charities confirming that £500,000 worth of funding has been made available for this financial year to ensure that the vital work these charities do in relation to patient advocacy is sustained, and I know officials are now meeting to begin the grant process to finalise the awards. And Madam Deputy Speaker, the Government also recognises the importance of Recommendation 5 on ending the defensive culture in the civil service. It's imperative we get this right so the public can put their trust in our institutions, which have let down not just the infected blood community, but victims of scandals that have taken place over decades. The Prime Minister has committed to legislation on a duty of candour and has confirmed the duty will apply to public authorities and public servants and include criminal sanctions. We are consulting on this issue and working to draft the best, most effective version of a Hillsborough law as part of our wider efforts to create a politics of public service. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, the inquiry's final recommendation relates to giving effect to the recommendations it's made. I am only too aware of the strength of feeling and the need to ensure that the infected blood scandal does not fade from public consciousness. A lot more needs to be done, and as I made clear to the inquiry in my evidence last week, I am open to considering how we can improve the government's actions to ensure we deliver justice for the victims of this devastating scandal. As progress continues to be made, my colleagues and I will report on the recommendations where we are responsible. We're committed to transparency and accountability, and we will publish the government's progress via a publicly accessible dashboard in due course, which will be regularly updated as progress is made. Madam Deputy Speaker, the victims of this scandal have suffered immeasurably. I pay tribute to the infected blood community once again for their courage, their perseverance, and their determination to demand justice for the wrongs that have been done to them. I hope this update provides them with some reassurance that we are learning and acting on the mistakes of the past, and where there is more to do, this government will do it. And I commend this statement to the House.
I call Shadow Minister Mike Wood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his statement and for advance sight of it. The infected blood scandal is one of the clearest failures of the state and public services in recent years, causing enormous harm over many years to countless victims and their families. Next week marks the first anniversary of the publication of the inquiry's report, and I add my thanks and those of my honourable and right honourable friends to Sir Brian Langstaff and his team for their work and for their comprehensive report. On 21st of May last year, my right honourable friend, the member for Salisbury, stood at the government dispatch box and made clear his determination to act on the inquiry's report, and I pay tribute to his work and thank him for the advice and support that he has given to me and the Shadow Cabinet Office team on this issue since the election. I'm pleased that the Paymaster General picked up from where his predecessor left off. As I have said before, both sides of the House speak as one on this issue. But sadly, nothing that we nor the government can do will undo the terrible damage caused by this scandal. No amount of money will bring back those who have been lost, and no amount of lessons learned can make up for the suffering of those who contracted serious illnesses because of contaminated blood. But we would be not only failing in our duty, but also failing all of those who have died and all of those who continue to live with life-changing conditions if we do not take up this battle on their behalf. And to do this, we must directly address the profound distress, anger, and fear that's being expressed by victims and their families at the pace of the full compensation scheme's rollout. Victims have referred in the recent hearings to the waiters' torture and disgraceful, just to mention a few cases. Of course, the gravity of those concerns has been underscored by the decision to reopen the infected blood inquiry for a further report on compensation. And whilst we support this decision, we of course need to make sure that it does not delay the proper compensation for those who have already lost so much. Because we know that with every week and month that passes, more infected and affected individuals will sadly die before receiving their full and final compensation. This underscores the human cost of every single day of delay. And so whilst recognising that the Compensation Authority was set up precisely to be independent of government in operational matters, I asked the Minister whether he is content with the current pace of delivery. And if not, what he and the government are doing to help David Foley and his team to speed up payouts to dying victims. Turning to other recommendations made by the inquiry, and on recommendation 6, on monitoring liver damage for people who are infected with hepatitis C, could I ask the Paymaster General what progress has been made on this recommendation within the National Health Service? And on recommendation 8, finding the undiagnosed, what action has been taken to ensure that patients who had transfusions before 1996 are offered a blood test for hepatitis C? Can the Paymaster General update the House on how many such tests have so far been carried out, and what assessment he has made of the additional infected and affected patients who may now be eligible for compensation? Madam Deputy Speaker, the journey to rebuild trust with the victims and their families will be long and requires not only words of apology and commitment, but crucially demonstrable action that proves that the government and indeed this House are listening and responding. The acknowledgement that the current compensation scheme has not yet won the full trust and confidence of the community is a start, and I hope the government will continue to take these concerns seriously to put in place the robust changes that are necessary, and we will support them in that work.
Master General. Points of order will come after the statement. Paymaster General.
I'm reassured. I'm just reassured. I think I can anticipate the honourable gentleman's point. I'm being reassured by the department it's being sent and it's on its way, is what I'm just being told. So I hope that might deal with that issue. So could I just say first of all to the Shadow Minister that I do think the cross-party approach that we've had has been very, very important. It was the approach, as the honourable gentleman knows, I took with my predecessor as Paymaster General, to whom the honourable member for Salisbury, to whom I've often paid tribute in this House for the diligent way in which he pursued this matter. I should also say to the honourable gentleman who asked me about current pace of delivery, absolutely not. I am restless for progress, and I will not be satisfied with the pace of delivery until the point at which everyone who is eligible for compensation has received it. He asked me about what we will do about the pace of compensation going forward. IBCA has adopted a test and learn approach. That test and learn approach is now being completed, and I expect to see a significant increase now in the pace of the payments. I will both, respecting IBCA's operational independence, be holding it to account, and indeed, quite rightly, I will be held to account by this House over the pace of payments. But secondly, I also stand ready to assist IBCA in whatever way I can to speed the payments up. On the issue of the monitoring of liver damage, there will be a new surveillance registry that will be set up. On the point he's asking about the blood test prior to 1996, for that detail I will ask my honourable friend who sat here to write to the Shadow Minister with the precise figures on that. But overall, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think it unites the whole House. We all want to see the pace of payments speed up, and that's exactly what I'm seeking to do.
Before I call any member, I would just like to say that we have looked at the at Gregory Stafford's point regarding a lack of copies of the statement, and I understand that the department have now sent statements to the vote office, and these are currently being printed and will be with us very, very shortly. I am sure the Minister will be looking into this, as he will have heard, and I am sure that he is as dissatisfied with the situation as the House. I now call Andrew Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I met with two of my constituents who've been tragically affected by this scandal and attended the hearings last week. They told me what an emotional day it was, almost like a family reunion in some ways, but the immense frustration at still having to fight in their long wait for justice remains. They told me again that they feel payments made to victims and families is happening far too slowly, and that it's still unclear what evidence they'll need to provide to support their claim. Now, I welcome that the government has identified $11.8 billion to pay compensation, and this has been properly budgeted for the first time. But I'm sure my honourable friend will agree with me that the challenge now is to ensure that trust is built and maintained as we complete this process. So could he possibly tell the House what he can do to ensure that the evidential requirements are clear to families to allow them to prepare for being contacted, and that payments are accelerated and that justice is delivered to everybody affected by this appalling scandal?
Paymaster General.
Yes, the hearing last week was an extremely moving experience, and he, I'm sure, will be aware of the evidence that I gave to the inquiry last week. So the point he's making about evidence is actually a really important point, because with regard to evidence, we know, first of all, that so much happened a long time ago, so evidence is difficult to source. But second, Sir Brian Langstaff's inquiry also identified evidence of deliberate document destruction. And for those two reasons in particular, it is essential that IBCA takes a sympathetic, enabling view to the evidence that is required and has caseworkers assisting victims in terms of finding the evidence they need.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Sarah Olney.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I thank the Paymaster General for advance sight of his statement. The infected blood scandal is a harrowing story of people being failed, not only by the medical professionals who treated them, but by the NHS, who should have been responsible for the safety of their treatment, and by a series of governments who should have prevented such horror from ever having taken place. As the Minister knows, I and my Liberal Democrat colleagues welcome the introduction of the Infected Blood Compensation Scheme. The Government was right to introduce the scheme at the start of the Parliament, and I'm glad to hear the Minister say the Infected Blood Compensation Authority are scaling up their operation. However, we're alarmed that the rollout of the scheme has been far too slow, leaving victims without the justice that they deserve. Victims and their families have been waiting for decades for answers and recognition of the suffering that they endured. So far, only 106 people have received payments from IBCA, with 54 others having received offers. Compensation payouts are not due to conclude until 2029, and this would rely on a rapid increase in the current rate of payments. We're deeply concerned by the speed at which victims are receiving their much overdue compensation, and I'm glad that last week's hearings looked into the adequacy and timeliness of the government's response. To echo the words of Sir Brian Langstaff, people infected and affected do not have time on their side. To that end, and to provide confidence to victims and their families, I ask the Minister to clarify what deadline he has for the implementation of the inquiry's recommendations. Moreover, what further steps is he taking to increase the speed at which payments are being made? And can he confirm when all victims can expect to have received their long overdue compensation? And also, what more can be done to help those who need to provide a proof of infection where their medical records have been destroyed? It's crucial that there are mechanisms in place to ensure the concerns of the charities, organisations and affected individuals are heard, supporting the work of these vital organisations and engaging with them to understand exactly the needs of those affected. Liberal Democrats are backing the survivors' call for a duty of candour on all public officials, and as such I'm glad to hear the sentiment behind the Government's response to Recommendation 5. However, I ask the Minister when the Government will bring proposals to this effect forward so that such a scandal is never repeated, and can he clarify why there's been a delay, given relevant legislation was originally meant to be published in April? Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Paymaster General.
Well, first of all, with regard to the current position, just over £96 million has been paid, and IBCA has invited 677 claimants to begin the process. But just to be clear, the date to which the Honourable Lady referred of 2029. Now, it is correct to say that there is what I regard as backstop dates of 2027 for the infected and 2029 for the affected, but that is what they are, backstops. They are not targets. The target is to make these payments as soon as possible. The Honourable Lady also raises the level of evidence, which I dealt with when in response to my Honourable Friend, and the kind of situation to which the Honourable Lady has referred, where you have medical evidence that for whatever reason has been destroyed, is precisely the kind of situation where you'd expect IBCA to take a sympathetic approach. On the issue of the duty of candour, the Government remains committed to bring in that duty of candour legislation. It is important, though, that we get it right and we ensure that the legislation will actually achieve the shared objectives that I'm sure the whole House would have about trying to prevent these types of scandals from happening again. But we have to ensure there are no intended consequences. So it's to get that legislation right that we are taking that bit more time.
Ian Lavery.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm in constant contact with the contaminated blood community, and thanks very much for bringing the statement to the House today. But they're still furious, they're frustrated in equal measure at the lack of progress with the claims being processed. And I'm speaking to an individual, a haemophiliac, one of the individual's children who unknowingly was used for research all those years ago. He asked the question, Minister, he asked, why is it that he was used in an experiment and he's likely to get less in terms of compensation for perhaps a drunken driver who crashed his car and needed a blood transfusion? I think that's a fair question. He also asked if members of this House understood the stress, the mental torment that individuals are going through, waiting on a Tuesday night, close of play, to see whether they're one of the lucky 100 to be processed the following week. I think they've got fair points. But thanks very much for everything my right honourable friend has done. Does he think these issues are fair?
Master General.
My honourable friend is a very powerful advocate and has been throughout this process for the victims. With regard to the specific circumstances that my honourable friend is referring to, this is a broad-based tariff scheme. It is absolutely vital that individual suffering and circumstances are reflected in the awards that are made. And to his latter point about, I know, the agony that victims are still going through in terms of waiting, I know he shares my desire to really push forward with these payments as quickly as possible.
Sir Jeremy Hunt.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I start by commending the approach the Paymaster General is taking? I know he is totally sincere about getting justice for this and really trying his best. But I think he also knows in his heart of hearts that the system that has been put in place is not working. And I also have constituents like Sue Collins, but others as well, who are asking why it is that in March, IBCA had only processed 250 odd of 4,000 people who are known to us, who've been on previous payment schemes. But I think even more worrying is the fact that they are saying they are aiming to process a majority, that could be just 51%, by the end of 2027. Does he not agree that the right target for IBCA is to commit to processing the vast majority, more than 90%, let's say, by the end of this year? And that's really what needs to happen, because 2 people are dying every single week, and justice delayed really is justice denied.
Master General.
Just pay tribute, first of all, to the Right Honourable Gentleman for the work that I know he did in government on this matter when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer. To his point around, first of all, those infected people who are known already because they are registered to schemes. He's clearly right to identify that particular group in terms of prioritisation and what is known. What I said last week to the inquiry about changes to the scheme was that I am open to changes that do not in themselves cause further delay. That's the open approach that I took last week at the inquiry, and it's the open approach I repeat to the House today.
Alex Boris Curtis.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to start by thanking my right honourable friend for the statement, the update, and I know the sincerity through which he wants to deliver this culture change, this one of many examples of failures by the state which we absolutely have to correct. As has been said on both sides of the House, and as has been said to me by constituents, speed in the delivery of compensation to infected and affected individuals is of paramount importance. So I wonder if you could say a little bit more about the conversations he's having with the devolved nations, in particular in Wales, but with all devolved nations, in order to bring efficacy to the recommendations, and also if he might have any advice he could offer to my constituent, Suzanne Morgan, who very recently visited my surgery. Her mother, Marie Jupe, died due to infected blood, but as her mother was not registered with an existing infected blood scheme or the Alliance House Organisation scheme, she is not eligible for any compensation. So I wonder if you could perhaps meet with me to discuss that case. Thank you.
Master General.
On the latter point, I should just say to my honourable friend, obviously my thoughts are with Suzanne, although in respect of Suzanne's mother, the registration deadline for the infected blood support scheme has passed. That does not mean that she is not entitled to compensation, so there would be an entitlement to compensation. With regard to the wider point about the whole United Kingdom, one of the issues I'm sure honourable and right honourable members will appreciate is that those awful days when this infected blood and infected blood products were being imported were in the pre-devolution age. But of course, many of the recommendations now require things to be implemented across the NHS, which of course are devolved. The undertaking I give to the House is I will continue to work closely with ministers in the devolved administrations to give that equity that my honourable friend is talking about in terms of the recommendations across the UK.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And clearly, to get to a good and timely operation of this compensation scheme is going to take the Paymaster General's personal attention, and I know he will give it that attention because of his dedication to getting this right. Could he also give an update to the House today on the anticipated memorial dedicated specifically to the children who were infected at Trelaws?
Master General.
Yeah, and I'd say to the right honourable gentleman, look, it's absolutely right that we have both a national memorial and indeed a memorial dedicated specifically to the children who suffered so much at Trelaws. And they both recognise what's happened, but also ensure that they will be remembered for future generations as well. The government is following the inquiry's recommendation that a steering committee be formed to decide what memorials are provided and where, with consideration being given as well to memorials in Northern Ireland, in Wales and in Scotland. And the membership of the steering committee will reflect the experiences of all routes of transmission, those infected, those affected, and also, I think, crucially, will contain representatives of all the UK's administrations.
Alice MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his statement. I fully agree with the need for urgency that's been reiterated on both sides of the House. I've spoken to constituents who are frustrated, but also the toil and distress, as we have heard, the turmoil and distress on them is immense. So could the Minister provide more detail on how individuals are being kept updated on the progress of their own individual claims, and also what support is being provided in terms of dedicated caseworkers to address these cases?
Master General.
So, Madam Deputy Speaker, firstly, IBCA publishes a regular monthly newspaper with newsletter with obviously data of the payments that are being made. Secondly, in terms of support, I think firstly the money that the government's announced for the charities that are providing such vital patient advocacy is hugely important. But I would also say to my honourable friend that, you know, I've also, in respect of those who are making claims, signed off money for both legal support and indeed financial advice, which I think are hugely important too.
Sir Julian Lewis.
The Minister referred briefly to something called a duty of candour, which will try to avoid a repetition of what was described as a defensive culture in the civil service. Can he expand on this phenomenon a bit? It's quite extraordinary, is it not, that when people in all innocence were infected with lethal diseases by the NHS, that civil servants should have gathered round to deny them the help and the compensation that they needed? Surely some sort of sanction ought to be involved. Is anyone going to be held to account for this? Because otherwise it will happen again, won't it?
Master General.
Well, to the honourable gentleman's point about potential criminal sanctions, I've always said I stand ready to provide whatever evidence would be requested of the Cabinet Office and indeed across government to any investigation. But to his point about duty of candour, what Sir Brian Langstaff said was that there wasn't an explicit conspiracy, but what there was a culture of institutional defensiveness, whereby individual public servants put personal reputation and institutional reputation above the public good. Now, as I said earlier in response to the Honourable Lady for Richmond Park, the government will bring forward legislation on a duty of candour, but it isn't just about legislation, landmark though it is also about leadership across public service to change culture, which is going to be very important in the years ahead too.
Jonathan Brash.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Paymaster General for his statement and for his correspondence on this issue on behalf of my constituent, Alex Robinson. Alex lost her father in 2006 to this scandal, having already lost her mother as a child. She was her father's carer from the age of 13. She is concerned that when a deceased victim leaves no spouse or partner, the estate is not entitled to the same compensation, irrespective of the role any member of that state may have played in the victim's life. Does the Minister agree that there are exceptional and unique cases like Alex's and that they need to be looked at differently? And will he meet with me to explore how we can ensure that this happens?
Paymaster General.
Firstly, I think the whole House and the thoughts of the whole House would be with his constituent Alex in terms of the loss of her parents. In respect of the point about a carer, carers are actually eligible for compensation under the scheme, but if he is willing to write to me, I'd be more than happy to have that individual discussion and correspondence on that case.
Pete Wishart.
Madam Deputy Speaker, last week's hearing was both fascinating but also quite disturbing, but one discrepancy pointed out right to me, and that was about bereaved partners and whether their loved one died before the 31st of March or not. Partners of those who died before 31st of March could receive up to 75% of their support payment, whereas newly bereaved partners are no longer able to register for these support payments. These are people who were often forced to give up their career to care for their loved ones, who were totally dependent upon these payments. Will the Minister now commit to review and to rectify this unfairness so that no bereaved partner is left behind simply because of the date of their loved one's death?
Paymaster General.
Just to be absolutely clear about this, the cut-off date is about registration for the support schemes. It is not a cut-off date for entitlement to compensation. Now, I said when issues around this were raised to me at the inquiry last week that if there was a particular issue around a gap in payments between cessation of payment and when compensation might be received, that of course I was willing to go away and look at it, and I will of course do that. The test that I apply is whether or not we are pushing this scheme forward. What we have to ensure is that I, and indeed collectively, we don't do things that would cause even further delay.
James Nash.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. One of the first pieces of correspondence that I received as a new MP on the 10th of July last year was from my constituent Robert Dickey, who passionately told me about his brother who died aged 31 from AIDS and hepatitis C after being infected with contaminated blood products. So I welcome this update today. The government recently announced that it has allocated funding for charities, which is a recommendation from the inquiry. Can the Minister outline what steps he's taken with the Department of Health and Social Care to make sure that funding gets to those charities?
Paymaster General.
My honourable friend raises a really important point. The charities have done a quite remarkable job in terms of supporting victims and indeed patient advocacy. I know that there have been meetings already with officials, and my honourable friend can be assured I'm working with my honourable friend, the Minister, who's here on the dispatch box, to ensure that money gets to the charities as quickly as possible.
Liz Jarvis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the Minister is aware, my constituent Gary Webster has had to live with HIV and hepatitis C since being given infected blood as a pupil at Trelaws. Gary's health is failing fast and he fears that he will not live to see compensation. Can the Minister give Gary and the other surviving Trelaws boys any reassurance that they will be invited to claim for compensation this year?
Master General.
Obviously, Madam Deputy Speaker, the way that IBCA is set up is that it is operationally independent, and I respect that independence. But as I indicated in answer to a previous question, and indeed I know she's raised, I think, Gary with me on a number of occasions before, and his case is to say that I stand ready to, first of all, hold IBCA to account, but also, secondly, I stand ready to give support as required by IBCA to ensure that we are moving forward, quickening the pace after the test and learn approach that IBCA has used.
Tom Collins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Families in Worcester have spent years caught in limbo, grieving the loss of loved ones, while navigating decades of delays and bureaucratic mazes that were handed down by the very systems intended to support them. So I welcome this statement of ambition in urgently delivering compensation and justice to those both infected and affected. The changes outlined at the end of March relating to people who lose their spouses as a result of infected blood are causing anxiety in my constituency, and they're concerned that the injustice of delay is going to be extended to them more severely than others. So please could the Paymaster General reassure widows and widowers whose spouses die from April this year that they will not be waiting years and years for support payments?
Yeah, as my honourable friend raises a very important point, and as I indicated in answer to the honourable gentleman from the SNP who's no longer in his place, the deadline is not a deadline to be able to claim compensation. It's a deadline on being able to apply for the support schemes. As I also indicated in that previous answer, if there is going to be injustice that arises from a gap in time, then I will look at that.
Kit Malthouse.
Thank you. As a number of members have said to the Minister, speed is obviously of the essence. So two questions. First of all, while I hear him say there's a sort of backstop date where he wants everything completed by, would it be possible for individual applicants to have a target landing date at which they will be contacted, or where the IBCA will contact them, so that expectations are managed and people can think about their affairs in due course? The second thing is, can you hand on heart say that IBCA has enough resources? If they had twice as many people, could they move twice as fast?
In relation to his first question, obviously I'm sure he will understand this as a former minister. I'm respecting IBCA's operational independence in terms of the payments that are being made, but as I've indicated on previous questions, I stand ready to help to push this forward. Secondly, absolutely there are adequate resources here. We've allocated £11.8 billion to this scheme, and I stand ready on, I did say the example he is using, which is around, say, number of caseworkers, for example. I stand ready to assist with that to push things forward with IBCA.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his statement today, fulfilling an earlier promise he made to make one. Can I also thank him for his correspondence with me about a specific case, and also welcome that the Government is committed in principle